Long before the Greeks wrote down the stories of Medusa, the Cyclopes, or the Hydra, the Aegean world was already filled with symbols, beliefs, and images of strange beings that blurred the line between gods, animals, and spirits. These early forms did not look exactly like the monsters found in later Greek mythology, but they reveal how ancient people used powerful, often frightening imagery to explain the unknown. To understand where Greek monsters truly came from, we have to look back to the civilizations that lived in the region during the 3rd and 2nd millennia BCE. The Minoans on Crete, the Mycenaeans on mainland Greece, and the broader cultures of the Near East. Their stories shaped the ideas that the Greeks would later transform into mythic beings. The earliest signs of monster traditions in the Aegean come from the Minoan civilization, which flourished from roughly the 3rd millennium BCE until around the middle of the 2nd millennium BCE. Minoan religion relied heavily on symbolic imagery rather than written myths. Their art shows creatures that combine human and animal elements, suggesting an early fascination with hybrid beings. Serpents appear frequently, especially in the form of the so-called snake goddess, a widely recognized figure from Minoan shrines. Although not a monster in the later Greek sense, she represents the deep cultural habit of linking animals with divine power. This idea would eventually produce figures like Echidna and the Gorgons, beings that embodied the ancient belief that nature could be both sacred and dangerous. Minoan artists also created images of bulls that played an important religious and social role. Bull-leaping scenes, carved seals, and frescoes show that the animal held symbolic weight, perhaps linked to fertility or the natural world's unpredictable strength. When we later encounter the Minotaur in Greek myth, this hybrid creature is not a random invention. It reflects centuries of cultural memory surrounding bulls and their significance in the Aegean world. The Minotaur myth emerges from a foundation built by earlier societies that saw power and danger in the union of humans and animals. While the Minoans shaped much of the visual and symbolic background, the Mycenaeans contributed a different element. Rising to power on mainland Greece in the 2nd millennium BCE, the Mycenaeans left behind written records in Linear B script, which mostly document economic matters rather than myths. Still, their art and burial goods show clear connections to Near Eastern traditions, especially those of the Hittites and Mesopotamians. These connections are important because the Near East was a major source of mythological ideas that later appeared in Greek stories. For example, Mesopotamian and Hittite myths include many hybrid beings and monstrous guardians. Winged lions, scorpion men, and composite beasts appear throughout Near Eastern art, often placed at gateways or sacred spaces. Their purpose was not only symbolic but also protective. These creatures served as spiritual defenders against harm or evil. When Greek myth later features the Chimera, the Sphinx, or the Gorgons, it echoes this same idea. Powerful creatures standing between the human world and forces believed to lie beyond. The Mycenaeans were active traders and warriors, moving across the Aegean and interacting with other cultures. Through trade networks and diplomatic exchanges, they encountered foreign stories, artistic styles, and religious beliefs. Scholars note similarities between the Near Eastern storm god tales and the Greek story of Zeus overthrowing the Titans. Likewise, the giant serpents and cosmic monsters described in ancient Mesopotamian texts share themes with later Greek tales of Typhon and the dragons challenged by early heroes. These parallels show that Greek monster mythology grew out of a long tradition of storytelling across the Eastern Mediterranean. Another important influence came from Egypt, where gods with animal heads represented different aspects of life and nature. While the Greeks did not adopt this imagery directly, they lived in a world where the idea of merging human and animal qualities was already well established. Trade between Egypt and the Aegean brought not only goods, but also artistic motifs. Egyptian sphinxes, for instance, may have helped shape the later Greek version, though the Greek sphinx became far more menacing and morally symbolic than its Egyptian counterpart. All of these cultural exchanges created the foundation from which Greek monster stories would eventually arise. But there is also a deeper human reason behind the appearance of monsters in early Aegean cultures. Ancient people faced constant dangers from the natural world. Earthquakes, storms, wild animals, and diseases shaped their understanding of the environment. Without scientific explanations, many communities personified these threats as supernatural beings. A dangerous mountain pass might be guarded by a serpent spirit in local belief. A fierce storm could be imagined as the anger of a divine creature. These interpretations were not just stories. They were attempts to make sense of unpredictable forces. This pattern appears in many societies, but the Aegean version would eventually take on a uniquely Greek form. The Greeks later turned these forces into characters with names, family lines, and motives. Before that transformation, however, the idea of monsters served a more practical purpose. They explained fear, guided ritual practices, and offered a way to express the tension between order and chaos. When the Mycenaean palaces collapsed around the end of the 2nd millennium BCE, the region entered a period known as the Greek Dark Age. Writing disappeared, trade networks weakened, and social structures changed. In times of instability, stories often grow more powerful. Oral traditions carried echoes of older beliefs through generations, reshaping them into the familiar myths that would later be written down. To understand how Greek monsters truly entered the world of myth, we must shift from archaeological origins to the poetic vision of early Greek storytellers. By the time poets such as Hesiod began shaping the Greek understanding of creation, the culture had moved from scattered local tales to a more unified effort to explain the structure of the universe. These explanations were not scientific, but they served a similar purpose. They offered an organized account of how the world began, why natural forces behaved the way they did, and where powerful beings, both divine and monstrous, fit into the cosmic order. The earliest surviving version of this story comes from Hesiod's Theogony, a poem composed around the late 8th or early 7th century BCE. It is not the only creation story that circulated in early Greece, but it became one of the most influential. Unlike the earlier Aegean traditions, which relied on symbolic imagery and local customs, Hesiod presented a genealogy of the cosmos. He described how the universe emerged from nothingness and how the first beings took shape. In doing so, he introduced the earliest Greek monsters, not as random creatures, but as essential parts of the world's formation. According to Hesiod, the universe begins with chaos. Modern readers often imagine chaos as disorder, but in the ancient Greek sense, chaos meant a vast, yawning gap, a space without shape or substance. It was neither good nor evil, simply the first reality. From this empty expanse came Gaia, the earth. Unlike the symbolic figures of earlier Aegean religions, Gaia in Hesiod's poem is both a physical entity and a divine force. She represents the land itself, fertile, stable, and capable of bearing life. Soon after Gaia appeared, another ancient power emerged, Tartarus. This deep, shadowy region beneath the earth would later serve as a prison for defeated gods and monsters. But in the beginning, It existed simply as one of the fundamental parts of the cosmos. Alongside these came Eros, representing the force of attraction that allowed the cosmos to grow and change. These early beings were not yet the monsters of Greek legend, but they formed the environment in which such creatures would eventually arise. Gaia, acting without a partner at first, brought forth several primordial beings. Among them were the mountains and the sea, but also figures who would later play enormous roles in shaping the Greek understanding of monstrous power. One of her first important offspring was Uranus, the sky. When Gaia and Uranus came together, they formed a divine pair that would produce both gods and monsters. Their union created the Titans, a generation of powerful beings who controlled various aspects of nature and existence. But along with these came another group, the Cyclopes and the Hecatoncheires. The Cyclopes of Hesiod's account are not the same as the later figure of Polyphemus, encountered by Odysseus. These early Cyclopes are primordial beings, each with a single eye, known for extraordinary skill in crafting divine weapons. Their names, Brontes, Steropes, and Arges, refer to thunder, lightning, and brightness. They symbolize the powerful natural forces that shape storms and bring both nourishment and destruction. The image of the Cyclopes forging thunderbolts for Zeus would develop later, but their association with elemental power begins in this early period. More fearsome still were the Hecatoncheires, beings with 100 hands and 50 heads. Their names, Cottus, Briareus, and Gyges, appear in Greek myth as symbols of overwhelming natural force. These creatures represent violence on a cosmic scale, the kind of power associated with earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and the raw instability of the earth. Unlike the Cyclopes, who possessed specialized abilities, the Hecatoncheires embodied sheer destructive strength. In Hesiod's account, Uranus feared them deeply and imprisoned them within the earth, creating the first conflict between generations of divine beings. This early conflict between Uranus and his children is crucial to understanding the later place of monsters in Greek mythology. Uranus, hoping to prevent the rise of powerful offspring, trapped the Cyclopes and the Hecatoncheires deep within Gaia's body. Gaia, burdened by their imprisonment, urged her children to rebel. Only one of the Titans, Cronus, agreed to act. With a sickle provided by Gaia, Cronus attacked Uranus and ended his rule. This moment marked the first cosmic shift in power and set a pattern that would repeat across Greek myth. When older forces try to suppress younger generations, conflict becomes inevitable. The fall of Uranus led to the rise of the Titans, but it also produced new beings. From the blood that fell upon the earth came the Erinyes, the giants, and other ancient forces tied to vengeance and struggle. These were not yet the monsters faced by human heroes, but they reflect the idea that violence between divine beings creates new forms of power, some righteous, some destructive, and some simply chaotic. From the sea foam that gathered around the remnants of Uranus, another figure arose, Aphrodite. Her appearance reminds us that in Greek myth, creation is rarely simple or single-purposed. Violent acts could bring forth beauty as well as terror. Cronus, having overthrown Uranus, took control of the cosmos. Yet like his father, he feared that his own children might rise against him. In an attempt to prevent this, he swallowed each newborn child produced by his union with the Titan Rhea. Here we see another important theme connected to monsters in Greek mythology. The cycle of fear and control that motivates divine beings. Every attempt to maintain order creates new tension, and from that tension, new beings and new conflicts arise. When Zeus was born, Rhea protected him by hiding him away. Cronus swallowed a stone in his place, believing it to be the infant. As Zeus grew in secret, the cosmos moved toward another great struggle. Once Zeus reached maturity, he forced Cronus to release the swallowed children. The emergence of Zeus and his siblings, the Olympian gods, set the stage for a major cosmic war known as the Titanomachy. This conflict is central to understanding the role of monsters in Greek mythology, because it establishes the pattern in which divine order must confront forces that precede it. The rise of the Olympian gods, led by Zeus, set the stage for one of the defining conflicts of Greek mythology, the Titanomachy. This monumental war between generations of divine beings reshaped the cosmos and firmly established the roles that gods and monsters would play in Greek stories. In the earlier periods of creation, the cosmos had taken shape through spontaneous emergence and acts of rebellion, but now it faced a structured and sustained conflict. The Titanomachy was not just a battle for power, it was a struggle over the future direction of the universe, determining whether the world would fall under the rule of the Titans or the Olympian gods. Within this immense conflict, monsters played essential roles, offering strength, skill, and symbolic meaning that extended far beyond the battlefield. The Titans, children of Gaia and Uranus, had ruled the cosmos under the leadership of Cronus. Their power was ancient, stretching back to the earliest days of creation. The Olympians, however, represented something new, a younger generation of gods with fresh ambitions and a vision for a different kind of cosmic order. The tension between these two generations was not simply personal. It reflected a broader theme found throughout Greek myth. The old resisting the new, and the new proving itself worthy through courage, strategy, and alliances. Before the war began, Zeus and his siblings secured important allies. One of the first steps Zeus took was to defeat the dragon-like guardian Campi, who had been entrusted by the Titans to watch over the imprisoned Cyclopes and Hecatoncheires. By freeing these ancient beings from their confinement in the depths of the earth, Zeus gained essential support. While the previous section explained how these beings originated and why they were imprisoned, their role in the war itself introduces a new chapter in the story. Once released, the Cyclopes used their elemental skill to create powerful weapons for the Olympian gods. They forged the thunderbolt for Zeus, a symbol that would come to define his authority, the trident for Poseidon, representing dominion over the sea, and the helmet of invisibility for Hades, granting him the ability to strike unseen. These gifts were not merely tools. They represented a transfer of power from the ancient elemental forces of creation to the emerging Olympian order. The Cyclopes, once feared for their raw strength, became integral partners in shaping the future. Their craftsmanship provided the Olympians with an advantage that shifted the balance of the coming war. The Hecatoncheires, with their overwhelming force, offered something different. Their 100 hands and immense power made them unmatched on the battlefield. Where the Cyclopes brought strategy and skill, the Hecatoncheires brought unstoppable physical might. Their involvement in the Titanomachy marked the first time these beings acted freely on the side of cosmic order rather than chaos. The decision of such formidable beings to align with Zeus reinforced the idea that the Olympians were not merely challengers, but the rightful heirs of the cosmos. Once alliances were secured, the war began in earnest. The Titanomachy lasted for many years. Ancient poets describe a conflict so vast that the earth, sea, and sky shook with its impact. Thunder roared, mountains crumbled, and the very fabric of the world was tested. Unlike the earlier struggle between Uranus and Cronus, which had been a swift and decisive act, this war required strategy, endurance, and leadership. The Titans fought from Mount Othrys, while the Olympians established themselves on Mount Olympus. These locations, which would later become central in Greek geography and mythology, gained their symbolic importance through this conflict. The Titans possessed great natural strength, and their experience in ruling the cosmos gave them confidence. Some Titans, such as Oceanus, remained neutral or distant from the conflict, but others fought fiercely. Figures like Atlas became emblematic of Titan resistance. Atlas's endurance in battle, and later his punishment, reflected the seriousness of the cosmic stakes. The Olympians, however, brought innovation, the strength of youth, and the support of the newly freed ancient beings. Monsters were not used simply for brute force. Their presence carried symbolic weight. The Hecatoncheires represented the raw might of the natural world, lending strength to Zeus's cause. The Cyclopes symbolized mastery over elemental forces, enabling the Olympians to harness lightning, water, and darkness in ways the Titans could not match. These associations made the eventual victory of the Olympians feel not just physical, but philosophical. It signaled a shift toward a cosmos governed by structured power rather than raw, ancient force. The war reached a turning point when the Hecatoncheires entered the battlefield with full strength. Their involvement is described as a storm of boulders and overwhelming force. The Titans, despite their power, could not withstand the coordinated assault of beings with such immense capability. Zeus, wielding the thunderbolt, led the final charge. The combination of divine leadership and monstrous support created a united front that the Titans could not overcome. When the Titans finally fell, the Olympians established their rule over the cosmos. The defeated Titans were imprisoned in Tartarus, the deep, shadowy region beneath the earth. The Hecatoncheires, once bound and hidden, now became guardians of the defeated Titans, reversing the roles they had endured in earlier generations. This shift symbolized a restored balance, one in which ancient forces were still present, but placed within a controlled framework. While many Titans were imprisoned, not all faced the same fate. Some, such as Prometheus and Epimetheus, were allowed to remain free due to their neutral or even supportive roles. Prometheus, known for his foresight, became an advisor to Zeus and would later play a major role in shaping humanity. These distinctions reveal that Greek myth did not view the conflict in simple terms of good versus evil. Instead, it depicted a complex world where alliances, decisions, and actions shaped destiny. The conclusion of the Titanomachy established a new cosmic order. The Olympians, with Zeus at their head, now ruled the universe. Their victory also marked the beginning of a new era in which the relationships between gods, monsters, and humans would take on deeper meaning. The war had shown that monsters could be instruments of both chaos and order, depending on who commanded their loyalty and how their power was used. With the Titanomachy resolved and the Olympian gods firmly in control, the universe entered a new phase of mythic history. Yet victory did not mean safety. The Titans had been defeated, but they were not the only ancient forces with the power to challenge the new divine order. Even as Zeus and his siblings established their dominion, the earth held within it other beings whose origins stretch back to the earliest days of creation. Among these, none were more fearsome than Typhon and Echidna. Their arrival in Greek myth represents a turning point, marking the moment when monstrous forces became organized into a lineage, one that would shape nearly every major heroic story that followed. Typhon's origins vary across different traditions, but most accounts agree that he emerged after the Titanomachy as a direct challenge to Zeus's rule. According to Hesiod, Typhon was born from Gaia and Tartarus. This parentage is significant because it united the Earth's primal power with the deep, shadowy realm beneath it. In other words, Typhon embodied the raw elemental force of the world's earliest days. His birth was often interpreted as Gaia's response to the imprisonment of her Titan children in Tartarus. The war had wounded the natural order, and Typhon rose as a living expression of that disruption. Descriptions of Typhon emphasize his overwhelming and chaotic nature. Ancient writers portray him as a colossal figure with serpentine elements. His lower half consisted of coiling, dragon-like bodies, while his upper form stretched toward the heavens. Some accounts describe hundreds of snakeheads extending from his shoulders, emitting every possible sound, from animal roars to human-like voices. These details reveal how Typhon stood not just as a physical threat, but as a symbol of disorder itself. He represented a world in which boundaries between forms, sounds, and elements had not yet settled into predictable patterns. The Greeks used Typhon to explain the violence of storms, volcanic eruptions, and fierce winds. Later writers connected him to Mount Etna or other volcanic regions of the Mediterranean, interpreting his struggles as the cause of natural disasters. While these interpretations emerged long after the earliest myths, they reflect the same core idea. Typhon was too powerful to remain a simple part of creation. He was a challenge to cosmic order, one that demanded a decisive response. That response came from Zeus. The Titanomachy had proven Zeus's leadership and strategic ability, but Typhon forced him into a confrontation unlike any before. The Olympian gods faced a foe who did not rely on allies or armies. Typhon fought alone, driven by primal force rather than organized rebellion. This made him unpredictable and extremely dangerous. The clash between Zeus and Typhon became a defining moment in Greek mythology, representing the final test of Zeus's authority. Accounts of the battle vary, but most describe a struggle that shook the heavens and the earth. Zeus unleashed his thunderbolts with a power unmatched in earlier conflicts, while Typhon hurled mountains, created firestorms, and used his serpentine limbs to strike at the sky itself. Ancient historians and poets sometimes described the war as a cosmic spectacle, with the world's elements twisting into violent turmoil. The battle eventually moved toward regions of volcanic activity, such as Sicily, where later generations believed Typhon remained trapped beneath the earth. The defeat of Typhon differed from the defeat of the Titans. The Titans were imprisoned, but they retained their forms and identities. Typhon, however, was crushed and buried, his monstrous energies forced beneath the Earth's surface. This outcome symbolized the taming of raw, elemental chaos. Zeus's victory reaffirmed his place as ruler of the cosmos, not simply because he won through force, but because he re-established balance and contained the last great threat from the earliest days of creation. Typhon's significance does not lie solely in his battle with Zeus. He also became the father of many of the monsters that would later appear in Greek heroic tales. This transition, from cosmic opponent to progenitor of terrestrial creatures, marks a major shift in how Greek myth used monsters. Instead of existing as vast, cosmic beings who threatened the universe directly, monsters now entered the world on a scale that humans could encounter. They became guardians of dangerous places, symbols of local fears, and challenges that heroes would need to overcome. Typhon's legacy thus moved from the heavens to the earth. The mother of these monsters was Echidna, a figure who is less well known than Typhon, but equally important. Echoing the ancient hybrid imagery found across the Aegean world, Echidna was described as half woman and half serpent. Her upper body appeared human, while her lower half consisted of a long, coiling snake body that could extend across the landscape. She lived far from civilization, often described as dwelling in caves or remote regions. These locations symbolized her association with mystery, danger, and the boundary between the human world and the unknown. Echidna's origins are less consistently recorded than Typhon's, but many accounts portray her as a child of primordial forces such as Phorcys and Ceto, ancient sea deities associated with monstrous beings. This connection reinforces the idea that Echidna belonged to a world older and darker than that of the Olympian gods. Her union with Typhon created a bridge between the cosmic monsters of early creation and the many terrestrial creatures encountered by later heroes. The offspring of Typhon and Echidna include some of the most famous monsters in all of Greek mythology. Among them were the Hydra of Lerna, the Chimera, Cerberus, Orthrus, the Sphinx, and the Nemean lion. Each of these creatures embodied a different form of danger, from impenetrable armor to venomous breath to riddle-based destruction. Their diversity reflects the broad symbolic range of the fears and obstacles that humans faced in the ancient Greek world. Typhon and Echidna, as parents, represented the source from which these challenges emerged. Unlike their father, who confronted Zeus directly, the children of Typhon and Echidna engaged with the world in subtler ways. They guarded isolated regions, terrorized communities, or tested individual heroes. Their roles shifted from cosmic challengers to narrative catalysts. Through their presence, heroes could prove their strength, intelligence, or virtue. The Greeks understood heroism not through abstract ideals, but through concrete actions, slaying monsters, surviving threats, and overcoming forces that stood between humans and a more ordered world. Another characteristic of Echidna's children is that many of them functioned not as enemies of the gods, but as creatures allowed to exist within the divine order. This detail is important. Zeus did not destroy every monster at birth. Instead, many were permitted to live, often in specific locations or under particular conditions. This suggests that the Greek cosmos, even under Olympian rule, still included zones of danger and mystery. The world was not fully tamed, and monsters provided a way to acknowledge the presence of forces that existed on the edges of human control. With the great cosmic battles resolved and the monstrous lineage of Typhon and Echidna established, Greek mythology moved into a new era, one defined not by struggles between gods, but by the rise of human heroes. This period marks an important transformation. Monsters were no longer forces that threatened the entire cosmos. Instead, they became woven into the landscapes, rituals, and identities of early Greek communities. In these stories, monsters acted as local powers, shaping the environment and challenging the first heroes who stepped forward to defend their people. This new role for monsters reflects the growing importance of human agency in myth. Earlier generations of gods had confronted dangers that existed on a cosmic scale. Now, the threats became more specific and connected to recognizable places. A serpent guarded a spring. A dragon roamed the border of a city. A monstrous creature inhabited a mountain or ravine. These beings were not born solely from divine conflict, but from the everyday experiences of early Greek communities who saw danger in unfamiliar terrain, wild animals, and unexplained natural forces. Myth transformed these fears into stories that explained how heroes brought order to their world. One of the earliest examples of this shift is the story of Cadmus, the founder of Thebes. According to myth, Cadmus was sent by his father, the Phoenician king Agenor, to search for his sister Europa, who had been taken by Zeus. Unable to find her, Cadmus consulted the oracle of Delphi for guidance. The oracle instructed him to abandon the search and instead follow a special cow until it lay down. There he was, to build a city. This marked the beginning of his connection to a specific place and to a monster that guarded it. When Cadmus found the location for his new settlement, he sent his companions to a nearby spring to fetch water. They never returned. Cadmus discovered that the spring was guarded by a serpent or dragon associated with the god Ares. This creature, rooted deeply in local tradition, represented the wild forces that early settlers often confronted. Forests, springs, and mountain passes all carried dangers, and myth used the imagery of snakes or dragons to express those fears. The death of Cadmus's companions reinforced the idea that monsters were not abstract beings. They were immediate threats tied to specific locations. Cadmus confronted the serpent and defeated it, an act that symbolized his authority to settle the land and establish Thebes. However, the myth did not end with the monster's death. Following divine instructions, Cadmus sowed the dragon's teeth into the earth. From these teeth sprang the Spartoi, a group of armed men who battled each other until only a few remained. These surviving warriors helped Cadmus build the city. This part of the story highlights a distinctive Greek theme. From the defeat of a monster, new forms of life and political order can emerge. The Spartoi were not seen as monstrous themselves, but as founders, showing how myths often used monstrous origins to explain the beginnings of institutions and communities. Another figure associated with early heroism and monsters is Cecrops, an early king connected with Athens. While Cecrops himself was sometimes described as half human and half serpent, his role in myth was tied to the formation of civic identity. Athens, like other Greek city-states, used myth to explain its earliest rituals and traditions. The presence of serpents in these stories reflected the ancient belief that serpentine beings represented both the underworld and the protective spirits of the land. In Cecrops's myth, serpents did not function purely as threats, but as symbols of ancient wisdom and continuity. Still, not all serpents or dragon-like creatures in early Greek stories were benevolent. Many served as embodiments of danger associated with the natural environment. For example, local legends recorded monstrous serpents that guarded agricultural fields, sacred groves, or mountain passes. These stories emerged from the challenges faced by early Greek settlers, who lived close to nature and frequently encountered real threats from wildlife. By turning these challenges into myths, communities gave meaning to their struggles and celebrated the heroes who overcame them. The rise of heroism in Greek myth also coincided with the development of city-state identities. Communities began associating themselves with particular legendary figures, each connected to specific monstrous encounters. These stories served several purposes. They provided explanations for sacred rituals, justified territorial claims, and strengthened communal pride. A hero who defeated a monster did more than eliminate a threat. He became a cultural ancestor whose actions shaped the identity of an entire region. One of the clearest examples of this phenomenon is the story of the founding of Thebes, but similar patterns appear in other regions as well. In Arcadia, local legends told of battles against giant boars or serpents that threatened crops. In Corinth, the early hero Bellerophon became associated with the Chimera, although his story expanded far beyond local boundaries. In these early periods, however, the focus remained on smaller, regional conflicts rather than pan-Hellenic adventures. What distinguishes this era is the transition from cosmic order to localized order. In the first generations of myth, the gods fought monsters to shape the cosmos and secure their rule. In this era, heroes fought monsters to shape their communities and secure the land for human habitation. This shift mirrored real historical developments. As Greek communities expanded and established permanent settlements, they faced the need to cultivate land, build fortifications, and protect themselves from external threats. Myths provided symbolic narratives for these practical challenges. The monsters of this period also took on different symbolic roles than the earlier cosmic beings. Dragons and serpents often represented natural barriers or the uncertainties of new territory. These creatures could dwell in rivers, springs, caves, and forests, places that held both resources and dangers. By defeating such monsters, heroes metaphorically transformed hostile wilderness into habitable land. The Greeks saw this transformation as essential to their cultural identity. A hero's victory over a monster stood as proof of human courage, intelligence, and determination. Another important aspect of this period is the growing connection between heroes and the gods. While earlier cosmic monsters threatened the gods directly, the monsters faced by heroes became opportunities for divine support. In many stories, heroes received guidance from oracles, omens, or specific deities. Cadmus received instructions from Apollo's oracle. Other heroes would later receive weapons, advice, or protection from gods such as Athena or Hermes. This relationship reinforced the idea that humans could achieve greatness when aligned with divine order. Unlike the primordial monsters of creation, the monsters of this era were also more diverse in form and purpose. Some acted as guardians, others as destroyers, and still others as tests of worthiness. Their variety reflected the complex environments in which early Greek communities lived. Even when a monster's physical description was fantastical, its symbolic meaning often stemmed from real observations. A dragon guarding a spring reflected the importance of water in arid regions. A serpent near a mountain pass represented danger from unknown terrain. Myth allowed these practical concerns to take dramatic and memorable form. As Greek mythology entered the age of well-defined heroic narratives, monsters began to take on new roles that extended beyond guarding landscapes or marking the boundaries of early settlements. They became instruments through which gods tested human potential, granting heroes the opportunity to prove their worth not only to their communities, but also to the divine order itself. No story illustrates this development more clearly than the legend of Perseus and the Gorgon Medusa. In this narrative, the monster is neither a cosmic threat nor a creature tied to the founding of a single city. Instead, Medusa represents a trial shaped directly by the gods, one that reveals how divine favor, human courage, and clever strategy interact in the world of Greek myth. Perseus's story begins with forces that were political rather than monstrous. His mother, Danae, lived under the control of her father, King Acrisius of Argos. According to tradition, Acrisius learned from an oracle that his daughter's son would one day cause his death. Fearing this prophecy, he confined Danae in a bronze chamber beneath the ground. Yet Zeus, taking interest in her, entered the chamber in the form of golden light, and Danae gave birth to Perseus. Acrisius, unable to kill his own daughter and grandson, but still afraid of the prophecy, set them adrift at sea in a wooden chest. This act reveals how human fear and divine intervention frequently intersected in Greek stories. While monsters posed physical dangers, the actions of kings and the choices of gods often created the conditions that led heroes toward their destinies. Perseus and Danae eventually reached the island of Seriphos, where they were given refuge. Perseus grew up under the protection of Dictys, a fisherman known for his kindness. However, the island's ruler, King Polydectes, became enamored with Danae and wanted Perseus out of the way. When Polydectes announced his desire to marry another woman, he demanded that his subjects bring him wedding gifts. Perseus, young and eager to defend his mother, boldly claimed that he could bring the king anything, even the head of Medusa. Polydectes seized upon this promise and sent Perseus on a quest that he believed would ensure the young man's death. This moment shows the shift in how Greek mythology used monsters. While earlier stories tied monsters to local conflicts or cosmic struggles, now a monster served as the focus of a heroic mission shaped by both human manipulation and divine purpose. The quest for Medusa's head was not simply an adventure, it was a test that would reveal whether Perseus could rise above the schemes of a corrupt king and navigate the challenges presented by the gods. Medusa, unlike many monstrous figures, was not part of the lineage of Typhon and Echidna. She was one of the three Gorgons, daughters of Phorcys and Ceto, ancient deities associated with the sea. Medusa alone was mortal, while her sisters, Stheno and Euryale, were immortal. What set Medusa apart was not only her mortality, but her tragic transformation. Earlier poetic traditions describe Medusa as a beautiful maiden who was changed into a monstrous form, her hair replaced with snakes, and her gaze made capable of turning anyone who looked at her into stone. This transformation was connected to divine conflict, particularly involving Athena. Though variations exist, the central theme remains consistent. Medusa's monstrous appearance resulted from divine punishment rather than natural birth. Perseus's challenge, therefore, was not to defeat a creature born from chaos, but to confront a being shaped by divine will. To succeed, he required more than strength. He needed divine guidance, and this marked a defining aspect of his story. Athena and Hermes played crucial roles in helping Perseus prepare for his quest. Athena offered protective wisdom and guided him toward the tools necessary for success, while Hermes provided him with a blade sharp enough to slay the Gorgon. This partnership between hero and gods distinguishes the Perseus narrative from earlier heroic tales. The gods were not distant observers, but active participants who shaped the outcome of the quest. Perseus's journey illustrates the Greek belief that divine favor was essential for heroism. Even the most courageous mortal could not overcome certain challenges without support from the divine realm. Athena directed Perseus to seek the Graii, three ancient sisters who shared a single eye and a single tooth between them. These mysterious beings were not themselves monsters in the destructive sense, but they were guardians of knowledge. They knew the location of the nymphs, who kept the divine treasures needed to confront Medusa. Perseus used cleverness rather than force when dealing with the Graii. By seizing their shared eye, he forced them to reveal the information he needed. This moment reinforces a recurring theme in Greek myth. Intelligence and resourcefulness often matter as much as physical strength. With the Graia's guidance, Perseus found the nymphs who possessed the key items required for his mission. They provided him with winged sandals for flight, a polished bronze shield, and the cap of invisibility that concealed him from sight. The polished shield from Athena proved especially important, as it allowed Perseus to approach Medusa without directly meeting her gaze. Each of these objects highlights how Greek mythology connected divine aid to heroic achievement. Rather than acting alone, Perseus became a bridge between human determination and divine support. Armed with these tools, Perseus traveled to the distant land where the Gorgons lived. Their domain reflected the terror associated with Medusa's presence. Ancient writers described the landscape as filled with statues. Warriors and animals turned to stone by a single glance. These frozen figures served as reminders of Medusa's power and the danger of confronting her. Yet they also symbolized a deeper theme. Monsters in Greek myth often represented the consequences of human mistakes, divine punishments, or moral failures. Medusa's ability to turn life into stone reflected the paralysis caused by fear or guilt. Perseus approached the Gorgons while they slept. Using the reflection in his shield, he avoided Medusa's deadly gaze. With a swift strike of his divine blade, he severed her head. At that moment, new life sprang from her blood. The winged horse Pegasus and the warrior Chrysaor. These beings reflected the dual nature of monstrous encounters in Greek mythology. From violence could emerge creativity, and from death could come new forms of power. Perseus placed Medusa's head into a special bag and fled as Medusa's immortal sisters awoke and pursued him. Here again, divine intervention played a crucial role. The cap of invisibility allowed Perseus to escape unharmed. Perseus's return journey expanded the significance of his quest. Along the way, he encountered new challenges and used Medusa's head not as a weapon of conquest, but as a tool of protection. The most famous episode involved the rescue of Andromeda, a princess chained to a rock as an offering to a sea monster sent by Poseidon. Perseus used Medusa's head to turn the creature to stone and saved Andromeda, further demonstrating how monsters in myth acted as catalysts for heroic virtue and compassion. As Greek mythology expanded beyond the early age of foundational heroes, it entered a period defined by structured narrative cycles and grand heroic challenges. At the center of this transformation stood Heracles, a figure whose encounters with monsters reshaped the meaning of heroism in the ancient Greek world. Heracles was not simply another warrior favored by the gods. He represented an ideal of strength, endurance, and perseverance unmatched by any other hero. Through his labors, monsters became symbols of disorder, chaos, and natural danger, while Heracles became the figure who could overcome them through determination, divine guidance, and remarkable physical power. Unlike Perseus, whose heroism emerged from a single major quest designed to test divine favor, Heracles faced a series of challenges tied to both personal responsibility and cosmic justice. His story began with a powerful identity conflict. As the son of Zeus and the mortal woman Alcmene, Heracles was destined for greatness. However, Hera, the wife of Zeus, resented her husband's affair and sought to make Heracles' life difficult from the moment of his birth. Her hostility toward him formed the backdrop for many of his trials. This divine conflict reveals a central theme in Greek mythology. Heroes often achieved greatness not simply because they were favored by the gods, but because they endured suffering and adversity shaped by divine forces. Heracles' greatest struggles took the form of the famous labors imposed upon him by King Eurystheus of Tiryns. These labors were assigned as a form of purification after Heracles, driven into madness by Hera, tragically caused the death of his own family. The Greeks believed that even heroic individuals were subject to moral responsibility, and that purification was necessary to restore balance. The labors, therefore, were not solely acts of strength. They were rituals of redemption. Through them, Heracles transformed from a figure burdened by guilt into a symbol of heroic endurance. Each labor introduced a new type of monster, each representing different aspects of danger and disorder in the Greek imagination. One of the earliest and most iconic challenges was the Nemean lion. This creature, born from the monstrous lineage of Typhon, or in some accounts descended from other divine sources, possessed a hide impenetrable by weapons. The lion terrorized the region of Nemea, making travel and settlement unsafe. When Heracles confronted the beast, he discovered that no sword or spear could pierce its skin. Instead, he used his strength alone, wrestling the lion and ultimately strangling it. By overcoming a monster immune to conventional weapons, Heracles demonstrated that human ingenuity and physical power could triumph over seemingly invincible threats. After defeating the lion, Heracles skinned it using its own claws, for no tool could cut through its hide. He then wore the lion's skin as a cloak, transforming a symbol of danger into a symbol of protection. This act illustrates a recurring theme in Greek mythology. The hero who conquers a monster often gains something from it: knowledge, protection, or prestige. The monster's power does not vanish. It becomes part of the hero's identity. Heracles' next major challenge involved the Lernaean Hydra, another creature tied directly to the ancient monstrous lineage. The Hydra was a many-headed serpent dwelling in the marshes near Lerna. When one of its heads was cut off, two more grew in its place. Additionally, its breath and blood were venomous. The Hydra represented a type of danger that could not be defeated through brute strength alone. Heracles needed assistance from Iolaus, his nephew, who helped him by cauterizing the neck stumps after each head was removed, preventing new heads from growing. This labor showed that even the strongest hero required cooperation and strategy to overcome certain threats. It also established a moral rule that Eurystheus later used. Labors performed with assistance did not fully count. This condition led to further challenges and ensured that Heracles' path to redemption remained difficult. Another significant labor was the capture of the Erymanthian boar. Unlike the Hydra or the Nemean lion, the boar was not supernatural in origin. Instead, it represented the destructive potential of nature itself. Enormous and fierce, it roamed the mountains, destroying crops and endangering villages. Heracles subdued it by driving it into deep snow, demonstrating that a hero must not only confront supernatural monsters, but also grapple with the realities of the natural world. The Greeks understood that threats could arise from every part of life, and heroic action involved facing all forms of danger. The Stymphalian birds offered a different type of challenge. These creatures, sacred to Ares, lived in the marshes near Stymphalus and possessed metal feathers that they could launch like arrows. Their presence made the region nearly uninhabitable. Heracles could not approach them directly, so Athena provided him with a special rattle crafted by Hephaestus. The noise frightened the birds into flight, allowing Heracles to shoot them down. This labor again showed that monsters could represent hazards beyond direct physical confrontation. Noise, distance, and environmental challenges played roles in shaping the hero's actions. As Heracles continued through his labors, the monsters he faced grew increasingly varied. The Ceryneian hind, for example, was a sacred deer belonging to Artemis. Heracles was required to capture it without harming it, illustrating that not all heroic encounters involved killing. Sometimes restraint was essential. This labor also highlights the Greek belief that heroes must respect divine boundaries. Even when commanded by Eurystheus, Heracles had to act in ways that avoided offending powerful gods. Another labor involved cleaning the Aegean stables, where King Aegeus kept vast herds of cattle. The stables had not been cleaned for many years, creating a monumental task. Although no monster guarded the stables, the challenge itself was monstrous in scale. Heracles redirected the courses of two rivers to wash away the accumulated filth. This act demonstrated his ability to use natural forces creatively, showing that heroism could involve transformation rather than destruction. The Cretan bull presented another type of threat. This powerful animal ravaged the island of Crete and symbolized uncontrolled force. Heracles captured it and brought it back to the mainland, reinforcing his role as a hero who restored order across regions. In other labors, Heracles confronted the man-eating mares of Diomedes, the Amazon queen Hippolyta, and the cattle of Geryon, each involving different mixtures of danger, negotiation, and strategic thinking. One of the most meaningful aspects of the labor cycle is the idea that Heracles confronted not only external monsters, but also internal struggles. At times, he faced creatures that reflected human vices or fears. For example, capturing the golden apples of the Hesperides required him to navigate deception, temptation, and negotiation. In one version, he even persuaded Atlas, the Titan condemned to hold up the sky, to retrieve the apples, while Heracles temporarily took on the burden of holding the heavens. This episode shows how Heracles, unlike many heroes, balanced physical hardship with intellectual resourcefulness. Throughout the labor cycle, Hera's hostility remained an underlying force. Her influence created obstacles that pushed Heracles to expand his abilities and confront challenges that tested every aspect of his character. In this sense, Hera served as a catalyst for Heracles' growth. Even though she opposed him, her actions contributed to the development of a hero whose strength became legendary. As the Greek world continued to develop more complex societies, mythology evolved alongside it. Monsters now served purposes that extended far beyond testing individual strength or marking dangerous landscapes. They became symbols that reflected political transformation, civic identity, and the relationships between emerging powers. No myth demonstrates this evolution more clearly than the story of Theseus, a hero whose confrontations with monsters paralleled the rise of Athens as a leading city-state. Through Theseus, the Athenians shaped a narrative in which defeating monsters meant far more than personal glory. It symbolized the triumph of civilization, order, and democratic ideals over chaos and oppression. Before Theseus became a central figure in Athenian identity, the city was a collection of scattered communities with limited political unity. While earlier heroes such as Heracles represented Pan-Hellenic strength, Theseus embodied something more specific, the spirit of Athens during the period when the city was forging its own civic identity. His stories, especially those involving monsters, were crafted and reshaped by later Athenians to reflect political values that would define the city for generations. Theseus's background offered fertile ground for such narratives. He was the son of Aegean, king of Athens, or in some traditions, the son of Poseidon, giving him both mortal and divine associations. His early life was tied to Troezen, a city in the Peloponnese, where he grew up unaware of his royal lineage. When he reached maturity, his mother Aethra revealed a sword and sandals hidden beneath a heavy stone, a test left by Aegean to identify his heir. Theseus lifted the stone and set out for Athens. This journey marked the beginning of a series of encounters with monsters and villainous figures that represented threats to social order. Unlike Heracles' labors, which often took place in distant regions, Theseus's early challenges occurred along the land route from Troezen to Athens. Each dangerous figure he confronted symbolized lawlessness in the territories he crossed. Among them was Perseus, sometimes described as a club-bearing bandit who attacked travelers. Theseus defeated him and claimed his club, turning a weapon of terror into a symbol of justice. Shortly afterward, he faced Sinis, also known as the pine bender, who killed victims by tearing trees apart. By defeating Sinis using the same method the bandit employed, Theseus enforced a moral principle common in Greek myth. Villains often suffered the fate they imposed on others. Further along the journey, Theseus confronted Siren, who forced travelers to wash his feet before kicking them into the sea, where a giant tortoise devoured them. Theseus ended Siren's cruelty by casting him into the same waters. He also defeated Procrustes, a figure who stretched or cut his victims to fit an iron bed. Theseus turned Procrustes' own method against him, ending his reign of terror. Each of these encounters reveals an important development in Greek mythology. Monsters and monstrous humans became embodiments of injustice and tyranny. By defeating them, Theseus symbolically cleared the path toward a unified and lawful Athens. These early exploits were essential for establishing Theseus as a hero capable of restoring order. But it was his journey to Crete and his battle with the Minotaur that transformed him into a political symbol for Athens. This myth reflects deeper historical tension between Athens and Crete, particularly the memory of older Minoan cultural influence. While the historical truth of such dominance is uncertain, the Athenians used the story to portray their rise from oppression to autonomy. According to tradition, the conflict began when Androgeus, the son of King Minos of Crete, was killed in Athens under suspicious circumstances. In response, Minos waged war and forced Athens into submission. As punishment, the Athenians were required to send a regular tribute of young men and women to Crete, where they were placed in the labyrinth and devoured by the Minotaur. This creature, born from a divine punishment involving Pasiphae, the wife of Minos, embodied the consequences of broken boundaries and moral transgressions. The Minotaur's existence, half human and half bull, represented a distortion of natural order. It lived in a maze created by the master craftsman Daedalus, symbolizing confusion, fear, and political domination. When the time came for the next tribute, Theseus volunteered to join the group of youths sent to Crete. His decision was not only an act of bravery, but also a demonstration of civic responsibility. Greek storytellers emphasized that Theseus acted on behalf of all Athenians, stepping forward to end a burden that weakened the city's pride and unity. Theseus's journey to Crete differed from the solitary quests of earlier heroes. It carried the weight of a community seeking liberation. Upon arrival in Crete, Theseus encountered Ariadne, the daughter of Minos. The role of Ariadne highlights the importance of cooperation and intelligence in heroic narratives. She provided Theseus with a ball of thread, which would allow him to navigate the labyrinth and return safely. Without this assistance, even a hero as skilled as Theseus would have been lost. The Greeks used this aspect of the story to emphasize that successful leadership required not only strength, but also wisdom, collaboration, and strategic thinking. Inside the labyrinth, Theseus faced the Minotaur, a monster unlike those confronted by earlier heroes. The Minotaur was not a cosmic being, nor a creature sent by the gods to test moral character. Instead, it was a symbol of political oppression and the fear associated with foreign domination. Fighting the Minotaur represented more than personal victory. It became the symbolic moment when Athens overcame its subjugation to Crete. Theseus defeated the monster through direct combat, demonstrating that human courage could restore justice and freedom. After slaying the Minotaur, Theseus led the Athenian youths out of the labyrinth using Ariadne's thread. This act of rescue transformed the myth from a simple heroic adventure into a story of liberation. Theseus did not return as a lone victor, but as a leader who saved an entire group of citizens. The Athenians later used this theme to reinforce their identity as a city that valued collective welfare and civic duty. The aftermath of the Minotaur's defeat also influenced Greek political symbolism. Theseus's escape from Crete, followed by his abandonment of Ariadne under complex circumstances, showed that heroes were not perfect, yet the central message remained clear. Athens could shape its destiny through courage and unity. Upon returning to Athens, Theseus played a foundational role in the city's political development. One of his most important contributions was the Synoecism, a unification of scattered Attic communities under Athenian leadership. While the details of this political action vary between sources, the myth portrays Theseus as a leader who transformed fragmented settlements into a coherent civic body. This unification helped Athens become one of the most influential city-states in Greece. By linking Theseus's political achievements to his defeat of the Minotaur, the Athenians created a powerful allegory. The hero who destroyed the monster also built the community. As Greek mythology continued developing its heroic tradition, the role of monsters shifted once again. Earlier stories had shown monsters as forces tied to local identity, political symbolism, or demonstrations of divine favor. But with the tale of Bellerophon and the Chimera, the Greeks explored a deeper and more philosophical question. What happens when human ambition grows too great? In this myth, monsters serve not only as dangerous beings to be defeated, but also as mirrors reflecting the fragile boundary between heroism and arrogance. Bellerophon's rise and fall illustrated how the Greeks used monsters to explore moral lessons about pride, restraint, and the consequences of overstepping divine boundaries. Bellerophon's early life, like that of many Greek heroes, was marked by noble birth and extraordinary potential. He was the son of Glaucus, king of Corinth, and the grandson of Sisyphus, a figure known for his cunning nature. In some traditions, Bellerophon's true father was Poseidon, which linked him to divine ancestry. Unlike Perseus or Theseus, however, Bellerophon did not begin his story with a quest shaped by community needs or divine punishment. Instead, he entered the world of heroic action through a series of personal trials that would eventually lead him to confront the Chimera, one of the most fearsome monsters in Greek mythology. The Chimera was a creature of terrifying hybrid form. Most accounts describe it as having the body of a lion, a goat's head rising from its back, and a serpent for a tail. It breathed fire and ravaged the region of Lycia, destroying crops, animals, and human settlements. The Chimera did not represent political oppression, like the Minotaur, nor natural barriers, like the serpents faced by early heroes. Instead, it embodied the irrational and unpredictable dangers of the world, a reflection of fear itself forged into a monstrous shape. Its form, stitched together from different animals, symbolized disorder and imbalance, qualities that clashed with the Greek ideal of harmony in nature and society. Before Bellerophon could face the Chimera, he encountered a challenge that set his fate in motion. While visiting the court of King Proetus of Tiryns, Bellerophon attracted the attention of the king's wife, Sthenebia. When Bellerophon rejected her advances, she accused him of attempting to dishonor her. Proetus, bound by the rules of hospitality, could not kill Bellerophon outright. Instead, he sent him to his father-in-law, King Iobates of Lycia, carrying a sealed message. Unbeknownst to Bellerophon, the message instructed Iobates to arrange his death. This moment reveals an important shift in the portrayal of monsters. In earlier myths, such as those of Heracles or Theseus, monsters often served as the primary source of danger. Here, the true threat came from human behavior, false accusations, political trickery, and betrayal. The chimera became a tool used by powerful men to dispose of an innocent hero. This narrative illustrates how Greek mythology increasingly blended human conflict with monstrous encounters, reminding audiences that human flaws could be as destructive as the beasts described in myth. Upon reading Brutus's message, King Iobates hesitated to kill Bellerophon directly, echoing the earlier dilemma faced by Brutus. Instead, he assigned Bellerophon what he believed to be an impossible task: slaying the chimera. By ordering the young hero to confront a creature known for its invincibility, Iobates assumed the problem would solve itself. Bellerophon, however, accepted the task without hesitation. The Greeks admired this type of heroic resolve. Even when manipulated by rulers or trapped by circumstance, the hero continued forward, demonstrating courage and trust in divine justice. Before confronting the chimera, Bellerophon sought the aid of Pegasus, the winged horse born from the blood of Medusa after she was slain by Perseus. Pegasus had roamed free, untamed by any mortal. To master such a creature was considered an almost divine achievement. According to many accounts, Athena appeared to Bellerophon in a dream and gave him a golden bridle. With this instrument, Bellerophon approached Pegasus at a spring and succeeded in binding him. The taming of Pegasus symbolized mastery over forces associated with the divine and the unknown. While many heroes received tools or guidance from gods, few succeeded in taming a creature that existed between earth and heaven. Pegasus played a crucial role in the quest against the chimera. The winged horse allowed Bellerophon to attack the monster from above, avoiding its fire-breathing maw and unstable mixture of animal strengths. Mounted on Pegasus, Bellerophon approached the chimera with caution and strategic insight. Ancient storytellers often described how Bellerophon shot arrows from the sky, striking the monster from a safe distance. In some versions, he used a block of lead attached to his spear. When the chimera attempted to engulf the spear in flames, the lead melted and flowed into the beast's throat, killing it from within. This act combined bravery with ingenuity, demonstrating that true heroism required more than physical power. With the chimera defeated, Bellerophon returned to King Iobates, expecting to receive gratitude. Instead, the king sent him on additional dangerous missions, hoping that another challenge might succeed where the chimera had failed. Bellerophon fought the Solymi, a fierce warrior tribe, and the Amazons, legendary female warriors known for their skill in battle. These conflicts, unlike the confrontation with the chimera, did not involve supernatural monsters, but human opponents of extraordinary strength and courage. Once again, the myth emphasized that heroism included confronting human threats as well as monstrous ones. Ultimately, Iobates realized that Bellerophon must be favored by the gods. He abandoned his attempts to have him killed and instead welcomed him with honor. Bellerophon married Iobates' daughter and inherited part of his kingdom. At this stage of the story, it appeared that Bellerophon had achieved everything a hero could hope for: success in battle, divine support, marital alliance, and political power. But it was precisely at this moment that the myth introduced the moral lesson that made Bellerophon's story so distinctive. Having achieved so much, Bellerophon began to desire even greater recognition. According to the myth, he attempted to ride Pegasus to Mount Olympus itself, seeking a place among the gods. This action crossed a boundary that no mortal was permitted to challenge. The Greeks viewed Mount Olympus as a symbol of divine order, harmony, and hierarchy. Mortals could receive help from the gods, converse with them, or even be descended from them, but they could not join them. By attempting to reach Olympus on Pegasus, Bellerophon committed an act of hubris, a reckless overstepping of divine limits. As Greek mythology evolved, storytellers expanded their focus beyond the familiar landscapes of mainland Greece and the Aegean coast. Heroes began traveling to distant territories, confronting challenges that reflected the uncertainty, wonder, and danger associated with exploring the unknown. In this new era of myth-making, monsters became more than symbols of moral tests or political allegories. They became guardians of faraway realms, creatures that marked the boundaries between the civilized world and lands filled with mystery. No tale embodies this spirit of exploration more fully than the myth of Jason and the Argonauts. Unlike the stories of Perseus, Heracles, or Theseus, Jason's narrative was shaped not by a single heroic figure acting alone, but by a collective undertaking. The Argonauts, a group of heroes gathered from across Greece, represented a wide range of skills, talents, and backgrounds. Their journey to the distant land of Colchis in search of the Golden Fleece brought them into contact with creatures and challenges that reflected the limits of Greek geographical knowledge at the time. To the ancient Greeks, the edges of the known world were places where divine forces mingled with the natural environment in unpredictable ways. Monsters in this context served as symbols of the unknown, a reminder that exploration always carried risks. Jason's story began in Iolcus, where his uncle Peleus had seized the throne from Jason's father, Aeson. A prophecy warned Peleus to beware of a man wearing only one sandal, and Jason fulfilled this sign when he arrived after losing a sandal while helping an old woman, who was actually the goddess Hera in disguise, cross a river. Peleus, recognizing the threat, sent Jason on a quest he believed impossible, retrieving the golden fleece from the distant kingdom of Colchis. The fleece, hanging in a sacred grove and protected by powerful forces, symbolized authority, legitimacy, and divine favor. For Jason, obtaining it offered a path to reclaiming his rightful place. To accomplish this goal, Jason assembled a crew of heroes from across the Greek world. Unlike earlier myths focused on individual glory, the Argonautic expedition highlighted teamwork and cooperation. Among the crew were figures such as Castor and Polydeuces, skilled fighters, Orpheus, whose music could calm even the wildest creatures, Atalanta, the swift huntress, and Heracles, whose strength was already legendary. This diverse group suggested that exploring distant lands required many different kinds of abilities, and that monsters in these regions posed threats that demanded collective skill. One of the first major encounters on their journey involved the Harpies, winged creatures known for tormenting the blind prophet Phineus. The Harpies swooped down to snatch food from Phineus's table, leaving him perpetually starving. These creatures did not embody physical devastation like the Chimera or the Hydra. Instead, they represented torment, unrelenting harassment, and the helplessness faced by those who suffered without relief. When the Argonauts confronted the Harpies, they did not kill them outright. Instead, the winged sons of Boreas chased them away, allowing Phineus to share crucial knowledge about the dangers ahead. This episode introduced a new dimension to the role of monsters. They could reveal information, establish alliances, and guide the hero forward. Phineus warned the Argonauts of one of the most dangerous obstacles on their route, the Symplegades, also known as the Clashing Rocks. These rocks crashed together unpredictably, crushing anything that attempted to pass between them. The Greeks imagined distant geographies as unstable and alive, places where the natural environment itself played the role of a monster. The clashing rocks were not sentient beings like Medusa or the Minotaur, yet they functioned like creatures guarding the path to the unknown. They represented the unpredictable dangers of distant seas. To overcome the Symplegades, the Argonauts followed Phineus's advice and released a dove to test the passage. When the dove made it through with only its tail feathers clipped, they understood that speed and timing were crucial. Rowing with all their strength, they passed through the rocks just as they closed, escaping with their ship's stern barely harmed. When the rocks clashed for the final time and then became still, the myth suggested that exploration had expanded the boundaries of the known world. By passing the Symplegades, the Argonauts symbolically opened a new route to distant lands. As the Argonauts continued toward Colchis, other challenges revealed how monsters functioned as guardians of foreign realms. In one region, they encountered hostile tribes with customs and values unfamiliar to Greek culture. Although not monstrous in appearance, these groups represented the same sense of otherness and peril that physical monsters embodied. Myth blurred the line between geographical distance and mythical danger, suggesting that lands beyond Greece were filled with challenges requiring both physical and intellectual strength. When the Argonauts finally reached Colchis, they faced the greatest challenge of all, the golden fleece itself. The fleece hung in a grove sacred to Ares, guarded by a sleepless dragon. Unlike the monsters encountered along the journey, this dragon symbolized possession, power, and deep-rooted tradition. The golden fleece was not merely a treasure, it was an emblem of authority and sacred heritage. King Aeetes of Colchis did not want to surrender it, and he imposed a series of tasks on Jason in an attempt to prevent him from succeeding. These tasks involved supernatural challenges that tested Jason's ability to think strategically. He had to yoke fire-breathing bulls, plow a field with them, and sow dragons' teeth that sprouted into armed warriors. Each challenge reflected motifs found in earlier myths: fiery animals, magically generated soldiers, and monstrous guardians. Yet they served a new purpose in the Argonautic story. They emphasized that distant lands held dangers shaped by unfamiliar customs, technologies, and beliefs. In these foreign territories, even the tools of agriculture and warfare possessed fantastical qualities. Jason's success depended not only on his own abilities, but also on the help of Medea, the daughter of Aeetes and a powerful sorceress. Their alliance revealed another theme associated with monsters in distant realms: the need for cooperation with local forces. Medea, trained in magic by her aunt Circe, provided Jason with the means to survive the bull's fire and defeat the Earthborn soldiers. She also offered him a potion to subdue the dragon guarding the golden fleece. Through Medea, the myth acknowledged that understanding foreign knowledge and respecting local traditions were essential parts of exploring the unknown. Using Medea's assistance, Jason approached the dragon as it guarded the sacred grove. Depending on the version of the myth, he either lulled the dragon to sleep with Medea's potion or used her guidance to slay it. The defeat of this guardian monster marked the completion of his quest. Unlike Perseus's defeat of Medusa or Heracles' battles with monsters, Jason's victory involved significant reliance on magical knowledge and interpersonal alliances. This reflected the Greek belief that distant lands offered not only dangers, but also wisdom, inaccessible within their own borders. The Argonauts' escape from Colchis involved yet more dangers, many tied to the monstrous or supernatural. In one version, Aeetes pursued them across the sea, forcing them to navigate through unfamiliar islands and past new threats. They encountered the sirens, whose enchanting songs lured sailors to their doom. Here, Orpheus played a crucial role, using his music to drown out the sirens' voices and protect the crew. This moment illustrated how monsters in Greek myth could embody psychological dangers, temptation, distraction, and loss of willpower. As Greek mythology entered a more mature literary phase, its portrayal of monsters shifted once again. In earlier periods, monsters had represented cosmic forces, natural dangers, political oppression, or the unknown edges of the world. But in the Odyssey, attributed to Homer and composed during the late 8th or early 7th century BCE, monsters took on a new and deeply psychological dimension. They became reflections of the fears, temptations, and moral challenges that confronted travelers far from home. Through the story of Odysseus's long voyage back to Ithaca after the Trojan War, the Greeks explored the inner landscape of the human mind, its resilience, its weaknesses, and its capacity for both wisdom and error. Unlike the Argonauts, who travelled in search of a distant prize, Odysseus journeyed with a single goal: returning home to his wife, Penelope, and his son, Telemachus. His struggle was not about claiming a throne or completing a divine labour. It was about enduring hardship, maintaining identity, and resisting forces that threatened to derail his path. The monsters he encountered served as embodiments of psychological and moral challenges, tests not only of strength, but of loyalty, discipline, self-control, and foresight. For this reason, the monsters of the Odyssey became some of the most memorable figures in Greek literature. One of the earliest and most iconic encounters of Odysseus's journey involved the Cyclops Polyphemus. Unlike the primordial Cyclopes of Hesiod's Theogony, Polyphemus was a pastoral figure, strong, solitary, and outside the norms of Greek civilization. When Odysseus and his men entered the Cyclops' cave seeking shelter, they found themselves trapped by a being who had no respect for guest friendship, a sacred Greek custom known as Xenia. Polyphemus devoured several of the men, demonstrating that the real danger he posed was not only physical but cultural. He stood as the opposite of Greek values, a creature who respected neither law nor hospitality. Odysseus's response to the Cyclops revealed both his ingenuity and his pride. He devised a clever plan to blind Polyphemus by offering him wine, identifying himself as nobody, and driving a sharpened stake into his eye while he slept. This act allowed the men to escape by clinging to the undersides of sheep as they left the cave. Yet Odysseus's need to claim credit for the victory, shouting his real name as he departed, led Polyphemus to call upon his father, Poseidon, for vengeance. In this moment, Homer demonstrated how a hero's flaws could create long-lasting consequences. Odysseus's journey became not only a physical challenge, but a test of character, patience, and humility. Following this encounter, Odysseus faced a series of monsters that each represented different internal struggles. One of the most symbolic was the episode with the sirens. Unlike physical threats, the sirens used sound, captivating songs that lured sailors to their deaths. They represented the danger of temptation, specifically the desire for knowledge without regard for consequence. Odysseus handled this challenge by recognizing its psychological nature. He ordered his crew to fill their ears with wax and had himself tied to the mast so he could hear the song without succumbing to it. This episode reflected the importance of self-restraint, acknowledging that even a wise hero could be vulnerable to desires that threatened his purpose. After the sirens, Odysseus confronted the paired dangers of Scylla and Charybdis. These two monsters represented different forms of unavoidable loss. Scylla was a multi-headed creature perched on a cliff, while Charybdis was a violent whirlpool capable of swallowing entire ships. Navigating between them required choosing the lesser of two dangers. Odysseus decided to pass closer to Scylla, sacrificing several of his men but preserving the ship. This moment illustrated the harsh reality of leadership. Sometimes a hero must make impossible choices, accepting loss to prevent greater catastrophe. Scylla and Charybdis served as metaphors for the difficult decisions faced by those guiding others through uncertain landscapes. Another important episode involved Circe, a sorceress who transformed Odysseus's men into animals. Though not strictly a monster in physical form, Circe represented the danger of forgetting one's identity. Her ability to alter the men reflected the transformative power of desire and comfort. Odysseus, with the help of Hermes, resisted her magic and eventually gained her trust. He and his crew remained with her for an extended period, illustrating how even a hero can become trapped by comfort and distraction. Yet Circe also offered wisdom, guiding Odysseus toward the underworld and helping him prepare for future challenges. Her dual nature, dangerous and helpful, demonstrated the complexity of encounters far from home. The journey to the underworld served as another major turning point in Odysseus's story. While this episode does not involve a traditional monster, the shades and spirits he encountered reflected the emotional weight of his journey. Heroes such as Achilles and Agamemnon shared insights about life, death, and the nature of suffering. Through these conversations, Odysseus learned that even the greatest warriors carried regrets. The underworld served as a reminder that the struggles a hero endures are meaningless without a purpose to guide them. Back in the realm of physical monsters, Odysseus later encountered the cattle of Helios, sacred animals protected by divine law. Although he warned his men not to harm the cattle, they disobeyed him when hunger overwhelmed them. The punishment that followed, destruction of the ship and loss of all companions, demonstrated the consequences of failing to observe divine boundaries. While the cattle were not monsters, the punishment reflected a recurring theme in Greek myth. Transgressions against divine order lead to severe consequences. Odysseus alone survived, showing that even the best leader cannot always prevent the failures of others. As Greek mythology expanded its understanding of the world, it also developed increasingly complex ideas about what lay beyond the mortal realm. The underworld, the mysterious domain ruled by Hades and Persephone, became a central setting where the boundaries between life, death, justice, and cosmic balance were explored. Within this realm existed a vast array of monstrous beings, each serving a purpose tied to the moral or existential order of the universe. These monsters differed from those encountered by heroes on Earth or across distant seas. They were not obstacles to be conquered or symbols of political oppression. Instead, they served as guardians, enforcers, and embodiments of the unseen forces that governed human destiny. The underworld did not function simply as a place of punishment or suffering. In Greek myth, it was a complex system with regions for the honorable, the forgotten, and the wicked. Monsters in this realm served as protectors of boundaries and as manifestations of divine justice. Their presence reinforced the understanding that death, like life, required structure, rules, and beings powerful enough to enforce them. The Greeks imagined the underworld as a landscape with rivers, gates, caverns, and courts of judgment, all overseen by formidable creatures that ensured order. One of the most iconic underworld beasts was Cerberus, the great three-headed dog tasked with guarding the entrance to Hades's realm. Each of Cerberus's heads symbolized vigilance, and the dog's serpent-like tail reinforced his connection to ancient monstrous lineages. Cerberus's role was not to torment the dead, but to prevent the living from entering without permission and to ensure that the dead did not escape. His presence reflected a fundamental Greek belief: death must remain separate from the world of the living. Cerberus's vigilance ensured that this boundary remained intact. His fearsome appearance, part dog, part serpent, combined familiar and otherworldly elements, illustrating the Greeks' belief that guardians of sacred thresholds required supernatural power. Another significant figure in the underworld was the ferryman Charon, a grim and silent figure who transported souls across the river Styx. While not monstrous in form, Charon occupied a role that carried deep symbolic weight. He enforced the rule that only the dead could cross into Hades, and only those who had received proper burial rites. The requirement of a coin to pay Charon highlighted the Greeks' emphasis on ritual and respect for the dead. Though not a physical monster, Charon represented the inevitability of death and the unyielding nature of the afterlife's laws. His presence underscored how Greek myth assigned responsibilities to beings who maintained cosmic order. More terrifying than Cerberus or Charon were the Erinyes, often known as the Furies. These vengeful spirits emerged from the blood of Uranus when he was overthrown by Cronus, tying their origins to the earliest conflicts in Greek myth. The Erinyes embodied divine retribution, particularly in cases of familial wrongdoing such as murder or betrayal. Their appearance, often described as women with serpents for hair and blood dripping from their eyes, reflected their relentless pursuit of justice. Unlike the monsters faced by heroes like Perseus or Theseus, the Erinyes did not confront individuals for personal glory or challenge. They pursued moral transgressions, ensuring that violations of sacred laws were punished. Their presence in the underworld emphasized that the realm was not merely a geographic location, but a moral landscape. Another guardian of the underworld was the spirit known as the Keres, associated with violent death. These beings hovered near battlefields, drawn to dying warriors. Though they did not dwell permanently in Hades, their connection to mortal suffering linked them to the broader cosmic system of death and retribution. The Keres illustrated the Greek belief that certain forms of death carried distinct spiritual consequences and required monstrous forces to oversee them. While not as individually famous as Cerberus or the Erinyes, they played a vital role in shaping Greek attitudes toward violence and mortality. Also significant were the Empusai, shape-shifting female beings often associated with Hecate, goddess of witchcraft and crossroads. The Empusai could appear as beautiful women to lure unwary travelers, but their monstrous nature revealed itself when they attacked, drinking the blood of their victims. These beings symbolized the fear of deception, illusion, and vulnerability when traveling near the boundaries between the world of the living and the supernatural. While they interacted more directly with the mortal world than some underworld beings, their allegiance to Hecate tied them firmly to the shadowed aspects of Greek belief. The underworld also housed creatures associated with judgment. Among these were the serpent-like guardians who protected the gates and passageways connecting various regions. Some traditions described a terrifying entity coiled around the entrance to Tartarus, the deepest part of the underworld. In this realm, the most dangerous and rebellious beings, such as the Titans defeated by Zeus, were held. Guards in Tartarus ensured that these powerful forces remained contained. Their roles connected them to the theme of cosmic stability. If earlier monsters represented chaos threatening the living world, these underworld guardians represented the containment of chaos, ensuring that ancient powers did not escape their confinement. Greek mythology also described the river beasts and entities associated with the underworld's waterways. The river Styx, symbolic of oaths and divine boundaries, was watched over by spirits whose presence alone deterred even the gods from violating its sanctity. Those who swore falsely upon the river faced consequences that only the underworld could administer. The Greeks believed that such oaths held cosmic weight, and the monstrous beings connected to the river embodied this seriousness. Another river, the Acheron, known as the River of Woe, was associated with deep sorrow. The presence of restless spirits along its banks indicated that not all souls found immediate peace in death. While not always depicted as monsters, these spectral figures contributed to the atmosphere of unease and reminded the living of the consequences of unhappy or unfulfilled lives. The Greeks understood that emotional suffering could linger beyond death, and the underworld's monstrous landscape reflected this belief. In addition to its guardians and spirits, the underworld contained legendary figures punished for their sins. While these figures were not monsters themselves, the punishments they endured often involved monstrous mechanisms. Tantalus, condemned to everlasting hunger and thirst, faced water and fruit that receded each time he reached for them. Sisyphus endlessly pushed a boulder uphill, only to have it roll back. These punishments revealed an important truth. The underworld was a place where the consequences of moral failure manifested in physically monstrous forms. The mechanisms of torment were as symbolic as the creatures that guarded the realm. The underworld also served as a setting for heroic encounters. Heracles, during his final labor, ventured into Hades to bring back Cerberus. This moment demonstrated that even the boundary between life and death could be crossed by a hero who possessed extraordinary strength and divine support. Heracles did not kill Cerberus. He subdued him without weapons, reflecting the Greek belief that the underworld's guardians were not enemies to be destroyed, but forces to be respected and constrained. Orpheus, another traveler to the underworld, encountered its monstrous guardians not with violence but with music. His descent to rescue Eurydice showed that the realm of death could be influenced not only by strength but by emotional power and artistic expression. In his presence, even Cerberus softened, suggesting that the underworld's forces responded to more than physical confrontation. Odysseus's journey to the underworld, described earlier, revealed that monsters in this realm often represented internal struggles rather than external threats. The shades he encountered spoke of regret, honor, and the consequences of human actions. Through these encounters, Greek storytellers emphasized that the underworld was a place where truth could not be avoided. Its monsters and spirits served as reminders of the moral structure underpinning the universe. As Greek mythology progressed, storytellers returned once more to the grand scale of divine conflict, battles that shaped not only the fate of gods, but the structure of the cosmos itself. After the defeat of Typhon and the establishment of Olympian rule, the universe entered a period of relative stability. Yet harmony in Greek myth was never permanent. Deep within the earth, powerful forces stirred, and from these forces emerged the giants, a new generation of monstrous beings whose rebellion against the Olympian gods came to be known as the Gigantomachy. This colossal war revived themes from the Titanomachy, but introduced new emotional, religious, and cultural meanings that deeply influenced Greek art, literature, and civic identity. The origins of the giants can be traced to one of the earliest acts of divine violence. When Cronus overthrew Uranus, the blood of the wounded sky god fell upon the earth, fertilizing Gaia and giving rise to the giants. This detail is crucial, for it emphasized that the giants were not merely creatures of brute strength. They were the direct result of cosmic injustice and the ongoing tension between generations of divine beings. Gaia, who had supported the Titans in their rebellion against Uranus and later saw her children imprisoned in Tartarus, carried a deep grievance against the Olympian order established by Zeus. In many versions of the myth, she called upon the giants to challenge the gods and restore balance, or perhaps revenge, for the treatment of her earlier offspring. The giants differed from the Titans in their appearance and role. While the Titans represented primordial forces, the giants embodied raw, untamed power closely linked to the earth. They were often depicted with human upper bodies and serpent-like limbs, their tails coiling like dragons beneath them. This blend of human and serpentine traits symbolized their connection to both the physical world and the ancient monstrous lineage found throughout Greek mythology. Their immense size and strength made them formidable opponents, but their origins rooted them deeply in the earth, reinforcing the idea that challenges to divine order emerged from within the natural world itself, not only from cosmic realms. The outbreak of the Gigantomachy was closely tied to this tension. As the Olympian gods expanded their influence and secured domains across the cosmos, the giants rose in defiance. Guided by Gaia, they launched an assault on Mount Olympus. The war that followed was not simply another struggle between generations. It symbolized the ongoing need to protect order from forces that could plunge the universe back into chaos. Each giant possessed unique skills or powers, and many were associated with specific landscapes or natural phenomena, highlighting the connection between monstrous forces and the physical environment. One of the most powerful giants was Porphyrion, often portrayed as a direct challenger to Zeus. His strength and ambition made him a central figure in the rebellion. In some accounts, he attempted to seize Hera during the battle, forcing Zeus to counter him with overwhelming force. Another formidable giant, Alcyoneus, possessed immortality as long as he remained within his native land. This condition gave him an advantage over the gods, who could not kill him unless he was removed from the region that granted his protection. The involvement of heroes became necessary to overcome such challenges. This detail emphasized an important theme that distinguished the Gigantomachy from earlier cosmic struggles. The gods needed human assistance to win. Heracles, the greatest of the Greek heroes, played a pivotal role in the Gigantomachy. His participation reflected a shift in the relationship between mortals and gods. Earlier myths portrayed cosmic wars as divine affairs, with humans too weak or insignificant to influence the outcome. But by the time the Gigantomachy myth took shape, Greek storytellers recognized that heroes served as bridges between mortal and divine realms. Heracles' strength and experience confronting monsters on Earth made him uniquely suited to aid the gods in a battle against monstrous foes on a cosmic scale. The participation of a mortal hero in a divine war carried symbolic significance. It suggested that the success of divine order depended not only on celestial power, but also on the courage and loyalty of human beings. This idea strengthened the connection between heroic tales and religious belief. It also reflected how the Greeks saw themselves in relation to their gods, not merely as subjects, but as participants in upholding the moral and cosmic order. The battles of the Gigantomachy were described as violent and chaotic. The giants assaulted Olympus with boulders, uprooted trees, and unleashed elemental destruction. Some giants were known for specific powers. Enceladus, for instance, was associated with volcanic activity. Later generations explained eruptions in regions such as Sicily by imagining Enceladus struggling beneath the earth after his defeat. This idea reflected a broader Greek tendency to use myth to explain natural phenomena. The physical world itself seemed alive with remnants of ancient divine conflict. To counter these threats, the Olympian gods displayed their full power. Athena struck down the giant Pallas and took his skin as her protective aegis. Zeus unleashed thunderbolts forged by the Cyclops. Poseidon used his trident to shatter the ground and strike at the serpent-footed giants. The battle showcased not only the strength of the gods, but also the diverse powers and personalities that defined the Olympian pantheon. The conflict did not blur their identities, but reinforced them, showing how each deity contributed to maintaining cosmic order. A crucial moment in the war occurred when Heracles helped defeat Alcyoneus. Aware that the giant could not be killed on his own land, Heracles dragged him away from his birthplace before striking the fatal blow. This act demonstrated the hero's strategic mind and the importance of knowledge in overcoming seemingly invincible foes. It also reinforced the idea that human ingenuity played a role in supporting divine rule. In another well-known episode, Dionysus used his ecstatic rites to confuse and disorient giants who attempted to resist the Olympians. This moment illustrated that divine power could take many forms. Not all battles were won by brute force. Some required psychological disruption or the manipulation of emotional states. Dionysus's involvement broadened the understanding of divine influence, showing that madness, ecstasy, and transformation could be as effective as thunderbolts and spears in cosmic warfare. The conclusion of the Gigantomachy reaffirmed the authority of the Olympian gods. With the help of Heracles, the gods defeated the giants, restoring stability to the universe. As with the Titanomachy, the defeated beings were buried beneath the earth. Many ancient Greeks believed that earthquakes and volcanic eruptions were signs of giants shifting or struggling underground. This belief demonstrated how deeply the myth was woven into the cultural imagination. Natural phenomena were not merely geological events. They were echoes of ancient battles that shaped the world. The Gigantomachy had profound cultural and artistic significance in ancient Greece. While the earlier Titanomachy symbolized the establishment of divine order, the Gigantomachy symbolized the ongoing need to defend that order. Greek artists frequently depicted the battle on pottery, temple reliefs, and monumental sculptures. The frieze of the Pergamon altar, one of the most famous artistic representations of ancient myth, portrayed the Gigantomachy in vivid detail. The imagery emphasized the power and dynamism of the gods, the ferocity of the giants, and the crucial role of Heracles. These depictions were not merely decorative. They conveyed messages of civic pride, divine favor, and the triumph of order over chaos. After the cosmic upheavals of the Titanomachy and Gigantomachy, and after the heroic age had filled the Greek world with tales of slayed beasts and conquered terrors, the role of monsters continued to evolve. They were no longer confined to distant lands, dark labyrinths, or the collapsing edges of divine warfare. Instead, monsters seeped into the daily life of ordinary Greeks, shaping religious practices, influencing community rituals, and appearing as protective symbols or ominous signs. In this stage of mythology, monsters became part of the social and religious fabric of Greek society. They existed not only in epic narratives, but also in household objects, temple decorations, local festivals, and oral traditions passed down through generations. To understand how deeply monsters permeated everyday Greek life, it is essential to recognize that ancient Greek religion was not centralized. There was no single sacred text, no unified clergy, and no strict division between myth and ritual. Belief operated through a web of local customs, oral traditions, and practices shaped by geography, economy, and communal needs. Within this environment, monstrous beings played multiple roles. They appeared as protectors, as warnings, as symbols of divine presence, and as reminders of unseen forces that shape the world. One of the most widespread examples of monstrous imagery in daily Greek life was the Gorgoneon, the stylized head of Medusa. While Perseus had slain Medusa in heroic myth, her power lived on in the form of protective symbols carved onto shields, temple pediments, doorways, and household pottery. The Gorgoneans served as an apotropaic device, an object intended to ward off evil. Ancient Greeks believed that images of monstrous faces could repel harmful spirits, misfortune, and envy. This belief was not unique to Greece. Similar practices existed across the Mediterranean. But the Greeks gave the practice a distinctly mythological form by adopting the face of Medusa, one of their most iconic monsters. The use of the Gorgoneon highlights how monsters could shift from being objects of fear to instruments of protection. Rather than avoiding the terrifying image, Greeks embraced it, believing that the same power that once turned men to stone could now defend their homes and sanctuaries. This transformation illustrates a central theme in Greek religious life. Power, even monstrous power, could be harnessed for positive purposes when understood and respected. Another example of monstrous presence in daily religion involved the Sphinx. While the Theban Sphinx is most famous for her riddle and her role in the myth of Oedipus, Sphinx imagery appeared widely in Greek art. These hybrid beings, part lion, part human, sometimes with wings, served as guardians in funerary contexts. Their presence on grave markers and sarcophagi reflected their association with transition, mystery, and the boundary between life and death. Unlike Medusa's head, which frightened harmful spirits away, sphinxes served as silent watchers, symbolizing the passage from one realm to another. Dragons and serpents also played important roles in Greek religious practices. Serpents were considered sacred to several gods, including Asclepius, the deity of healing. In sanctuaries dedicated to Asclepius, sacred snakes lived among the worshippers, symbolizing renewal and transformation through the shedding of skin. While serpents in heroic myths often appeared as dangerous beasts, real-life ritual practices associated them with health, rebirth, and divine presence. This duality reflects how Greek society integrated contradictory ideas about monsters depending on context. A serpent could be deadly in one story and sacred in another. Local festivals across Greece often incorporated monstrous themes into their ceremonies. In Athens, for example, the Panathenaic festival included processions, competitions, and sacrifices that celebrated the city's patron goddess, Athena. The imagery associated with these events often invoke the goddess's victories over monstrous beings such as giants and serpentine foes. By reenacting or referencing these triumphs, communities affirmed their belief in divine protection and cosmic order. The monstrous beings defeated by Athena became symbols of the forces that threatened civic harmony. Their presence in ritual dance, song, and storytelling reinforced the idea that society must continually guard against disorder. In rural areas, local traditions often preserve stories of regional monsters connected to specific landscapes. Springs, caves, and mountain passes were frequently associated with serpents or dragons said to guard them. Such stories served practical purposes. They warned travelers of dangerous terrain, discouraged children from wandering into hazardous areas, and explained natural features that lacked obvious causes. A deep whirlpool might be attributed to a lurking monster. A sudden rockfall might be interpreted as the work of a restless spirit. In these cases, monstrous beliefs helped communities make sense of unpredictable or dangerous natural phenomena. Farmers and shepherds also encountered monstrous symbolism in their daily routines. Crop fertility, livestock health, and weather conditions were often interpreted through omens involving unusual animals or strange occurrences. A malformed animal born into a herd might be seen as a sign of divine displeasure or a warning of misfortune. While such interpretations varied between regions, they demonstrated how deeply supernatural belief permeated practical life. Monsters, or signs associated with them, helped people interpret the world around them. Household religion also incorporated monstrous motifs. Domestic shrines sometimes included small statues or painted symbols intended to protect the family from harm. These symbols could depict lions, griffins, or hybrid creatures. The griffin, with the body of a lion and the head and wings of an eagle, was a popular guardian figure. Although griffins appeared in myth as powerful and sometimes dangerous beings, their image in everyday life conveyed strength, vigilance, and the ability to detect hidden threats. Magical practices in ancient Greece, though often kept private, also employed monstrous imagery. Amulets, curse tablets, and protective charms might depict strange creatures or invoke the names of monstrous beings. Such artifacts were not necessarily connected to official religion, but reflected personal attempts to influence fate or protect against misfortune. Monsters in this context became tools in the negotiation between human vulnerability and supernatural forces. In civic religion, monsters often played symbolic roles in myths used to justify rituals or explain sacred sites. The sanctuary of Apollo at Delphi, for example, was linked to the myth of the python, a serpent that guarded the sacred spring until Apollo slew it. This myth helped define Apollo's authority over prophecy and establish the origins of the Pythian games, celebrated in the serpent's memory. The python, though defeated, remained part of the ritual identity of Delphi. Each cycle of performances and ceremonies at the site reenacted or referenced the serpent's death and Apollo's victory. Through this ritual retelling, the monstrous past was woven into the cultural present. Monsters also played a role in defining the boundaries of Greek identity. Many Greek communities saw themselves as heirs to a world cleared of monsters by earlier heroes. Temples sometimes displayed artwork showing the labours of Heracles or the victories of Theseus, reminding citizens of the heroes who shaped their world. These depictions were not merely decorative. They conveyed religious and civic messages. They reinforced the belief that order, justice, and prosperity depended on the triumph of divine-backed heroes over monstrous forces. In some cases, local legends preserved unusual monsters unique to specific regions. These creatures were not part of the major mythological canon, but appeared in oral traditions, local poetry, and family stories. They illustrated how deeply monstrous belief had taken root in Greek culture. Even without being part of the well-known mythological lineage of Typhon or Echidna, these local monsters served the same purpose. They connected communities to their landscapes, traditions, and pasts. The Greeks also interpreted astronomical phenomena through monstrous imagery. Constellations such as Hydra, Cetus, and Draco represented mythical beasts whose stories were mapped onto the night sky. These celestial monsters reminded observers that the supernatural world extended beyond Earth and influenced the heavens. By linking monster myths to constellations, Greek culture integrated mythology into navigation, seasonal observations, and agricultural planning. As Greek society advanced, particularly during the classical and Hellenistic periods, a new intellectual curiosity began reshaping how people understood their world. This shift did not erase the rich mythological tradition of monsters, but transformed the way educated Greeks interpreted those stories. Philosophers, historians, and natural thinkers began asking questions that earlier generations had not emphasized. What lay behind the tales of hybrid creatures and supernatural forces? Were these beings literal, symbolic, or perhaps misunderstood accounts of real phenomena? Through this evolving perspective, monsters transitioned from unquestioned elements of mythic reality into subjects of philosophical reasoning, cultural symbolism, and proto-scientific explanation. This intellectual transformation reflects a broader trend in Greek thought, the desire to reconcile myth with reason. Rather than dismissing myth entirely, Greek thinkers sought to reinterpret it, offering explanations rooted in natural philosophy, historical memory, or moral allegory. As a result, monsters became tools for exploring ethics, psychology, nature, and the origins of culture. One of the earliest and most influential approaches to reinterpretation came from the tradition known as euhemerism, named after the thinker Euhemerus. Although Euhemerus lived during the Hellenistic era, the spirit of his reasoning resonated with earlier classical thinkers as well. Euhemerus argued that many gods and mythical beings were originally historical figures whose deeds were exaggerated over time. This approach suggested that monsters too might have begun as real animals, foreign cultures, or unusual natural events later transformed into mythic tales. For example, stories of the Cyclopes were sometimes interpreted as encounters with early metalworkers who lived in remote regions and worked near blazing furnaces. Their single eye might have referred to the circular opening of a forge. Similarly, ancient writers speculated that tales of giant beings could have originated from observations of large prehistoric bones found in Mediterranean landscapes. Greeks, encountering these enormous fossils, might have imagined them as remains of giants or monstrous ancestors rather than extinct animals. Historians such as Herodotus also contributed to the reinterpretation of monsters, though often unintentionally. While traveling through distant regions, Herodotus reported observations of unfamiliar animals, cultural practices, and landscapes, sometimes describing them in ways that blurred the boundary between fact and myth. For instance, he spoke of giant ants in India that dug up gold-bearing sand, a story likely rooted in exaggerated accounts of large marmots. This example showed how misunderstandings or mistranslations could evolve into monster-like narratives. Herodotus did not claim that these creatures were supernatural, but his accounts helped later readers understand how unfamiliar natural phenomena might inspire monstrous imagery. The rise of natural philosophy significantly reshaped the intellectual landscape. Thinkers such as Anaxagoras, Democritus, and later Aristotle promoted the idea that natural explanations should be sought for unusual occurrences. Rather than accepting monstrous births, strange animals, or hybrid creatures as divine signs, they encouraged people to question how such phenomena could arise from natural processes. Aristotle, in particular, classified animals with remarkable precision and offered explanations for unusual species or deformities. He believed that nature followed patterns and that deviations from these patterns could be understood through observation rather than myth. In this context, monstrous creatures mentioned in earlier stories were increasingly interpreted as misunderstandings of natural behavior or exaggerations of real animals. The chimera, with its combination of lion, goat, and serpent traits, was sometimes explained as a poetic representation of a region in Lycia, where different dangerous animals inhabited the same mountain. The hydra's regenerative heads might reflect early observations of snakes that shed their skin, or of octopuses that regrow limbs. Although these interpretations were speculative, they reflected a growing desire to bridge myth and natural reality. Philosophers also used monsters as allegorical tools. Plato, for example, explored the idea that monstrous figures could symbolize internal human struggles. Although he did not focus extensively on mythological monsters, his philosophical discussions often used beast imagery to represent uncontrolled desires, irrational impulses, or moral imbalance. In this framework, monsters became metaphors for elements of the human psyche, rather than literal creatures wandering ancient landscapes. Similarly, the Stoics interpreted myths, including those involving monsters, as moral lessons encoded in symbolic form. For them, the defeat of monsters by heroes represented the triumph of reason over chaos, self-discipline over temptation, and virtue over vice. A Stoic thinker might view Heracles' victory over the Nemean lion as a metaphor for overcoming overpowering challenges, or Perseus' confrontation with Medusa as the victory of clarity and reason over fear. The stories were not dismissed, they were reframed to serve philosophical teaching. Another important shift involved the increasingly global outlook of the Greek world after the campaigns of Alexander the Great. As Greeks established cities across Asia and encountered new animals, landscapes, and cultures, many earlier monstrous descriptions began to seem less supernatural. Creatures once viewed as fantastical, such as the rhinoceros or the crocodile, could now be observed directly. Writers compared these real animals to legendary beasts, sometimes suggesting that myths had exaggerated unfamiliar creatures seen during trade or exploration. A Greek encountering a Nile crocodile for the first time might have found it comparable to the dragons of earlier tales. At the same time, the blending of Greek and Eastern traditions introduced new interpretations. Scholars in Alexandria, working in one of the great intellectual centers of the ancient world, collected, analyzed, and compared myths from multiple cultures. They noted similarities between Greek monsters and those from Egypt, Mesopotamia, Persia, and India. This comparative approach encouraged the idea that monsters were cultural expressions shaped by geography and environment. A serpent associated with a river in Greece might have a counterpart in the crocodile gods of Egypt or the dragon myths of Mesopotamia. This period also saw the emergence of rationalized retellings of myths. Historians such as Diodorus Siculus offered accounts in which heroes like Heracles and Theseus battled not supernatural creatures but hostile tribes or dangerous animals that later storytellers embellished. The Minotaur, for example, was sometimes reinterpreted as a Cretan prisoner or warrior wearing a bull mask. Such interpretations reflected the desire to preserve the moral significance of the story while grounding it in plausible historical events. Yet despite these rationalizing trends, Greek thinkers did not abandon the symbolic power of monsters. Even as philosophers explained myths through nature, psychology, or history, artists and poets continued to depict monsters as awe-inspiring beings. Vase painters, sculptors, and dramatists use monstrous imagery to evoke emotion, illustrate themes, and bridge the gap between human experience and the supernatural. Monsters remained part of the cultural imagination, even as intellectuals reshaped their meaning. Another significant development was the use of monsters in medical and scientific literature. Physicians such as Hippocrates wrote about unusual births, deformities, and rare conditions. These accounts were not framed as supernatural events, but as natural phenomena with physiological explanations. The shift marked a departure from earlier beliefs that monstrous births reflected divine punishment or ominous signs. Instead, they became subjects of natural inquiry. Yet the language used, still describing such occurrences as monstrous, revealed how deeply mythological ideas influence scientific vocabulary. Even moral philosophers engaged with monstrous themes. Seneca, in his tragedies, depicted hybrid and monstrous imagery to explore human cruelty, ambition, and madness. Through dramatic metaphor, monsters express the consequences of unchecked emotion or tyrannical behavior. Although Seneca lived in the Roman period, his work reflected a broader Greco-Roman tradition of using monster imagery to probe human psychology. With the rise of Alexander the Great and the spread of Greek influence across a vast stretch of territory extending into Egypt, Persia, Central Asia, and even parts of India, Greek mythology entered a period of transformation unlike any before it. Greek language, art, and ideas traveled alongside armies, merchants, and scholars, merging with the traditions of cultures far older and broader than anything the Greek world had previously known. This cultural exchange reshaped the landscape of Greek myth, especially in the realm of monsters. Where earlier Greek monsters reflected local landscapes, moral lessons, or cosmic conflicts, Hellenistic monsters reflected curiosity about foreign lands, cultural blending, scientific observation, and an expanding sense of the world's scale. During this era, the Greek imagination was confronted with unfamiliar animals, new natural environments, and distant peoples whose customs were interpreted through mythic frameworks. The boundaries of the known world widened dramatically, and with this expansion came new stories, new interpretations, and new beings that enriched the monstrous canon. One of the earliest impacts of Hellenistic expansion involved the Greeks' encounters with the fauna of distant regions. In India, travelers described enormous serpents, elephants of astonishing size, and strange hybrid animals that seemed to defy known categories. When Greek writers attempted to describe creatures such as the Indian rhinoceros, they drew comparisons to the monsters of earlier myth. A rhinoceros, with its thick hide and single horn, could easily be linked in the Greek mind to legendary beasts like the one-eyed cyclopes, or fierce bulls encountered by heroes. The elephant, with its massive strength and nearly mythic presence on the battlefield, resembled descriptions of monstrous guardians or ancient giants. These comparisons did not necessarily reflect literal belief in new monsters, but showed how Greeks used their mythological vocabulary to understand the unfamiliar. At the same time, new creatures from foreign cultures found their way into Greek storytelling. The griffin, originally a creature from the art and myth of regions around the Black Sea in Central Asia, grew in significance during the Hellenistic period. Though known earlier, it gained new layers of meaning as trade expanded. Greek traders heard stories from nomads about fearsome beasts guarding gold in the mountains of the east. These accounts blended with Greek artistic traditions, transforming the griffin, a creature with a lion's body and an eagle's head, into a symbol of distant lands filled with riches and danger. The griffin thus evolved from a mythic guardian into a cultural emblem of exploration and wonder. Similarly, the dragon tradition expanded as Greeks encountered new stories from Persian and Near Eastern cultures. Persian myth included powerful serpent dragons associated with cosmic battles and protective deities. These traditions influenced how Greek writers imagined dragons in distant territories. Whereas earlier Greek dragons tended to be linked to specific local sites, Hellenistic dragons became global figures representing the majesty and terror of the unknown world. Their roles grew more varied, appearing as guardians of sacred spaces, adversaries for heroes traveling beyond Greece, or symbolic embodiments of natural or moral challenges. Another significant influence came from Egyptian culture. When Greeks entered Egypt, they encountered a society with a vast pantheon of hybrid gods, beings with human bodies and animal heads, such as Anubis, Horus, and Sekhmet. While Greek religion did not directly adopt these deities, their imagery expanded Greek ideas about hybrid beings. Some Greek writers attempted to rationalize Egyptian myths, while others embraced their symbolic richness, incorporating new motifs into evolving Greek monster traditions. Egyptian creatures like the Sphinx, already known to Greece, gained renewed meaning through cross-cultural interpretation. The Egyptian Sphinx was a guardian of order, quite different from the destructive Theban Sphinx. By encountering both versions, Greek scholars and artists expanded their understanding of how monstrous forms could carry different symbolic functions depending on cultural context. The blending of Greek and Eastern thought also influenced philosophical interpretations of monsters. Hellenistic scholars, working in centers such as Alexandria, sought to classify and understand the natural world with increasing precision. They collected information from travelers, conducted observations, and compared accounts from various cultures. As a result, some monsters formerly accepted as supernatural began to be reinterpreted as exaggerated descriptions of real animals. Giant birds described by Indian explorers might have been large eagles or condors. Stories of men with dog heads could reflect observations of unfamiliar tribes wearing animal masks or living in remote, misunderstood communities. Yet even as scientific thinking advanced, mythical creatures continued to thrive in Greek storytelling. Poets of the Hellenistic age used monsters to express emotions, themes, and philosophical ideas. Callimachus, for instance, wrote hymns and poems that incorporated mythological beings as metaphors for moral lessons or cultural expression. Apollonius of Rhodes, author of the Argonautica, revisited the story of Jason with Hellenistic sensibilities. His descriptions of monsters were more detailed, more psychological, and more attuned to the natural world than earlier accounts. He portrayed the harpies, the Colchian serpent, and other creatures with a blend of realism and mysticism that reflected the era's new intellectual climate. Another major development involved the Greek fascination with geography. As knowledge of distant lands expanded, monsters began to appear in descriptions of far-off regions rather than in the heart of Greece. The concept of the edgelands, places beyond the limits of Greek familiarity, became central to Hellenistic monster lore. India, Ethiopia, Arabia, and Scythia were all described as territories where strange and wondrous beings resided. These were not always treated as literal monsters, but as markers of cultural and geographic difference. A Greek reader encountering such descriptions would understand that the farther one travelled from the familiar Mediterranean world, the more likely one was to encounter extraordinary creatures. Importantly, Hellenistic monster stories often carried subtle messages about cultural understanding and misunderstanding. Tales of people with giant ears, people who could not speak, or tribes described as savage or mysterious, were often reflections of cultural anxiety rather than accurate depictions. Greeks used monstrous imagery to make sense of unfamiliar customs, languages, and appearances. Yet at the same time, some writers challenged these assumptions, suggesting that what seemed monstrous was simply unfamiliar. In this way, monster stories became tools for exploring cultural identity and difference. The influence of Hellenistic science also reshaped how Greeks thought about hybrid beings. Scholars debated whether hybrid creatures such as centaurs or satyrs could ever exist in nature. While many concluded that they could not, they used these discussions to explore broader questions about biology, reproduction, and natural order. These debates showed how monsters stimulated scientific curiosity, driving philosophers to articulate theories about the limits of nature. Another significant aspect of Hellenistic monster tradition was its connection to military expansion. Greek soldiers marching into unfamiliar territories encountered animals such as camels, elephants, and crocodiles for the first time. The reports they sent back often carried dramatic descriptions. War elephants, in particular, played a crucial role in shaping Greek imagination. To soldiers accustomed to horses and chariots, the sight of towering elephants used in battle must have seemed almost mythic. Their use by Eastern armies made them symbols of foreign power. It was not long before artistic representations and popular tales associated elephants with the monstrous or the exotic, even as practical military accounts sought to understand their tactics and training. This period also witnessed the spread of Greek culture back into Greece itself. As returning soldiers, travelers, and scholars brought stories of strange creatures, the Greek world was flooded with new descriptions of beings that blurred the line between reality and myth. Some of these accounts were incorporated into formal works of geography, such as those by Strabo, while others circulated through popular storytelling. Whether viewed as literal truths or fascinating curiosities, these tales enriched the Greek imagination. As Greek culture spread throughout the Mediterranean and eventually came under Roman rule, the mythic tradition of monsters entered yet another phase of transformation. The Romans inherited an extensive Greek mythological framework, but they did not simply preserve it. Instead, they reshaped Greek monsters according to their own cultural values, political ambitions, and literary traditions. Through this process, monsters gained new symbolic meanings, adapted to Roman storytelling, and became instruments for exploring themes central to Roman identity, such as order, conquest, morality, and imperial power. The Roman attitude toward Greek myth was complex. Roman intellectuals admired Greek literature, philosophy, and art, drawing inspiration from Homer, Hesiod, and later Greek poets. Yet Rome also possessed its own religious and cultural heritage, shaped by Italic traditions, Etruscan beliefs, and a deep sense of historical destiny. When Greek monsters entered Roman stories, they often became tools for expressing Roman visions of authority and civilization. Monsters were no longer simply opponents that a hero overcame. They became symbols of Rome's capacity to conquer chaos and unify the known world. One of the earliest and most influential Roman poets, Virgil, integrated Greek monsters into the Aeneid, Rome's national epic. In this work, monsters served as obstacles that tested Aeneas, the Trojan hero destined to found the lineage that would lead to Rome. Yet these monsters were not mere replicas of their Greek predecessors. Virgil used them to explore themes of duty, destiny, and the tension between personal desire and public responsibility. For example, Aeneas's journey brought him into contact with Scylla and Charybdis, the same terrifying forces encountered by Odysseus. While their basic nature remained familiar, one a many-headed predator and the other a deadly whirlpool, their presence in the Aeneid emphasized the difficulty of achieving Roman destiny. Where Odysseus's encounters highlighted cleverness and survival, Aeneas's interactions underscored endurance and sacrifice. This shift reflected the Roman belief that greatness stemmed not from personal triumph alone, but from devotion to a higher purpose. Virgil also introduced the Harpies as morally charged figures. The Harpy Celaeno cursed Aeneas, predicting hardship on his journey. In Greek myth, the Harpies were tormentors who punished wrongdoers or served as agents of divine justice. In the Roman version, their prophecy took on a deeper moral meaning. The founding of Rome required suffering, struggle, and perseverance. This reinterpretation aligned monsters with Roman values, transforming them into symbols of fate and moral testing rather than simply dangerous creatures. Ovid, another major Roman poet, approached Greek monsters in a different manner. In the Metamorphoses, he retained the vivid imagery and dramatic encounters of Greek myth, but used monsters to explore themes of transformation, identity, and the fluid nature of reality. Ovid's poetic style emphasized motion and change, reflecting the instability and unpredictability of the world. Monsters in his works often played roles in stories of metamorphosis, showing how human emotions, jealousy, pride, fear, could manifest in monstrous forms. For instance, Ovid reimagined the story of Medusa not just as a fearsome creature, but as a tragic figure transformed by injustice. He described how Medusa, once a beautiful maiden, was punished by Athena after being violated by Poseidon in her temple. This interpretation highlighted the cruelty of divine punishment and evoked sympathy for a figure once seen solely as a monster. Medusa's monstrous form became a symbol of victimization and the enduring consequences of violence. Through Ovid, monsters gained psychological depth and emotional resonance in Roman literature. The Romans also adopted Greek monsters into their art and architecture, embedding them into the design of temples, public buildings, and household objects. The Gorgoneon, already a popular protective symbol in Greece, became even more widespread in the Roman world. Medusa's head adorned shields, breastplates, mosaics, frescoes, and even door knockers. Roman soldiers believed that the image could protect them in battle, preserving the apotropaic function that had been central to Greek culture. Another monster that captured Roman imagination was the Hydra. In Roman military symbolism, the Hydra represented forces that multiplied when attacked, a metaphor used to describe rebellious territories or persistent threats to the empire. Senators and generals invoked the Hydra as an image of disorder that required strong, decisive action. Unlike Greek myth, which treated the Hydra primarily as a test of Heracles' ingenuity, Roman use of the Hydra emphasized political control and imperial authority. The Romans also expanded the monstrous world by integrating creatures from the lands they conquered. From North Africa came accounts of crocodiles, hippopotamuses, and other animals unfamiliar in earlier Greek traditions. Roman natural historians like Pliny the Elder catalogued these creatures, blending empirical observation with mythic storytelling. Pliny's natural history contains descriptions of dragons, giant serpents, and hybrid beasts encountered or rumored to exist in distant provinces. Though presented as scientific writing, his work often preserved fantastical details that kept monstrous imagination alive. In Roman culture, monsters played a significant role in public entertainment as well. The amphitheatres of the empire, including the famed Colosseum, occasionally staged performances or hunts involving exotic animals that Romans associated with mythic creatures. Lions, leopards, bears, and elephants were brought from foreign territories and displayed in dramatic spectacles. Although these animals were real, their presence in controlled environments evoked the idea that Rome had conquered the monstrous forces of nature. This association reinforced the empire's image as a civilizing power capable of taming or dominating even the most dangerous beasts. Yet Roman reinterpretation did not always elevate monsters to symbols of imperial power. In some contexts, monsters became metaphors for tyranny, excess, or moral decay. Roman satirists, such as Juvenal, used monstrous imagery to criticize political corruption, comparing oppressive officials or immoral citizens to beasts of myth. These symbolic uses continued the long tradition of using monsters to explore human vice, but they now served a distinctly Roman purpose, commenting on social and political life within a vast empire. Roman religion also incorporated monstrous figures into rituals and myths that blended Greek and Italic traditions. Some Italian deities, associated with the underworld or agriculture, merged with Greek mythic beings, creating hybrid traditions. Local spirits, protector gods, or ancestral figures developed monstrous traits in literary retellings. For example, the Italian guardian figure of the genius Loci, or spirit of place, sometimes appeared in Roman imagery as a serpent, reflecting both Greek mythic symbolism and Italic religious practices. As the ancient world transitioned through Roman rule and into the medieval era, the myths of Greece did not disappear. Instead, they evolved, adapted, and resurfaced in countless new forms. Greek monsters, once guardians of local springs, terrors of heroic journeys, or symbols woven into cosmic wars, became some of the most enduring figures in global storytelling. Their transformation across centuries reveals how cultures reinterpret older ideas to address new fears, new hopes, and new understandings of the world. In this final section, we explore how Greek monsters survived the fall of antiquity, influenced medieval and Renaissance thought, and continue to appear in modern literature, psychology, cinema, and popular culture. The endurance of Greek monsters began with the storytelling traditions preserved through Roman education, early Christian writers, and medieval scholars. Even as the philosophical and religious foundations of Europe changed dramatically, classical texts remained part of scholarly life. Monasteries copied portions of Homer, Hesiod, and later mythographers, ensuring that tales of cyclopes, gorgons, harpies, and centaurs were not lost. However, their meaning often shifted. Medieval thinkers such as Isidore of Seville reinterpreted monsters symbolically. For them, monsters were not ancient beings living on remote islands, but moral or spiritual warnings. A multi-headed creature might represent the dangers of sin, while a hybrid beast could symbolize distorted human nature. This shift allowed Greek monsters to survive within a Christian intellectual framework that otherwise rejected pagan beliefs. During the Middle Ages, travelers' tales and encyclopedic compilations expanded monstrous traditions even further. Greek creatures blended with stories from North Africa, the Middle East, and Central Asia. The monstrous races described by Herodotus or Pliny the Elder became part of medieval cartography, appearing in manuscripts as markers of distant lands. Cyclopes, dog-headed men, and other hybrid beings were placed near the edges of world maps, serving as symbols of the unknown. Though transformed into geographical curiosities rather than mythic threats, these monsters continue to embody the boundaries between the familiar and the mysterious. The Renaissance sparked a renewed interest in Greek mythology, fueled by humanist scholarship, expanded access to classical texts, and an artistic movement that valued ancient themes. Artists such as Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, Titian, and Caravaggio reimagined encounters with Greek monsters in dramatic visual form. Medusa's severed head appeared in paintings and sculptures as a powerful symbol of fear, beauty, and transformation. The Hydra, the Chimera, and the Minotaur re-entered the artistic imagination, now depicted with realism and emotional intensity. Renaissance thinkers also approached monsters with fresh curiosity, using them to explore anatomy, natural science, and the limits of human understanding. In this era, monsters became both artistic subjects and intellectual puzzles, bridges between myth and emerging scientific thought. By the Enlightenment, European writers increasingly viewed Greek monsters through rational, allegorical, or psychological lenses. Philosophers interpreted them as metaphors for human emotions, destructive passions, or social disorder. The Minotaur, once a literal monster in a labyrinth, became a symbol of humanity's internal struggles. Medusa's petrifying gaze was analyzed as a metaphor for paralyzing fear or overwhelming beauty. The Hydra represented the persistent nature of vice or social problems that multiplied when attacked without understanding their root causes. Enlightenment thinkers prized reason, and monsters offered dramatic illustrations of what unruly instincts or chaos might produce if reason failed. Greek monsters entered modern storytelling in even more dynamic ways. In the 19th century, writers of the Romantic movement drew on ancient myths to explore themes of heroism, tragedy, and the sublime. Poets such as Percy Shelley, Lord Byron, and others revived the imagery of serpents, giants, and hybrid beasts to express emotional extremes and existential questioning. Meanwhile, archaeology brought new attention to ancient Greece. The rediscovery of ruins, artifacts, and frescoes enriched the public imagination and reinforced interest in mythological narratives involving monsters. In the 20th century, psychology introduced yet another reinterpretation of Greek monsters. Sigmund Freud, for example, famously used the Medusa myth to explore themes of fear, sexuality, and repression. Other psychologists saw monsters as manifestations of the unconscious, symbols that express deep emotional or psychological challenges. Carl Jung argued that mythological creatures reflected archetypes rooted in the collective human imagination. In this context, Greek monsters were not simply relics of the past. They became expressions of universal human experiences, representing fear, transformation, desire, and the conflict between instinct and rationality. Cinema and modern literature provided new life to ancient monsters by placing them within contemporary narratives. Early films adapted Greek myths directly, showcasing creatures such as the Cyclops or Medusa through innovative animation and special effects. Later, Greek monsters served as inspirations for entirely new fantasy worlds. The Minotaur influenced stories involving labyrinthine challenges and human-animal hybrids. Centaurs appeared in numerous works as both wise mentors and untamed forces of nature. The Gorgon myth inspired countless reinterpretations in horror, fantasy, and science fiction. Perhaps the most influential modern revival of Greek monsters came through popular fantasy genres. Writers such as J.R.R. Tolkien, C.S. Lewis, and later J.K. Rowling incorporated elements of Greek myth into their invented worlds. Creatures resembling harpies, hydras, and siren-like beings appeared in their narratives, reshaped to fit the moral and thematic needs of new stories. Greek monsters proved remarkably adaptable, capable of entering new settings without losing their symbolic power. In contemporary cinema and television, Greek monsters have become iconic. Films such as Clash of the Titans, Percy Jackson and the Olympians, and various adaptations of the Odyssey introduced younger audiences to the ancient creatures through modern visual storytelling. Video games further expanded their reach, transforming monsters like Cerberus, Medusa, and the Hydra into interactive challenges. These digital interpretations often stayed close to traditional designs while adding contemporary flair. Through these platforms, Greek monsters became living figures in global popular culture, encountered not only in books or museums, but in immersive, interactive experiences. Greek monsters also experienced new interpretations in modern fantasy literature that explored moral complexity. authors began asking whether creatures once viewed as purely monstrous might have their own perspectives, emotions, or histories. Retellings of the Medusa myth, for example, reframed her not as a villain, but as a survivor of divine injustice. Minotaur stories explored themes of isolation, identity, and misunderstood nature. This shift aligned with broader cultural movements that sought to question traditional binaries: hero versus monster, beauty versus terror, civilization versus chaos. Meanwhile, scientific discovery continued influencing how people understood ancient monsters. Paleontologists suggested that Greeks who discovered large fossilized bones might have imagined giants or monstrous hybrids. Scholars proposed that stories of dragons and serpentine creatures could have originated from encounters with unfamiliar animal species. These theories enriched modern discussions, blending mythology, archaeology, and natural science. Despite these reinterpretations, the core features of Greek monsters remain deeply recognizable. They embody fear of the unknown, fascination with hybrid forms, and the belief that danger often hides at the edges of human experience. Whether appearing in classical texts, Renaissance art, modern psychological theory, or cutting-edge entertainment, these monsters still serve as vehicles for exploring profound questions about human nature. Their persistence across centuries reveals a fundamental truth. Greek monsters endure not because they belong to the past, but because they continue to express timeless human concerns. They represent the struggle to confront inner fears, the challenge of facing external threats, and the constant dialogue between chaos and order. In many ways, they reflect humanity's evolving relationship with the world, its mysteries, its dangers, and its possibilities. As we conclude this journey through the entire story of Greek monsters, it becomes clear that these creatures are far more than characters in ancient tales. They are cultural symbols that have shaped human imagination for millennia, continuing to influence stories across the globe. Their legacy lives on in every hero's journey, every story that blends fear and wonder, and every narrative that dares to explore the boundaries of the unknown.